Здравствуйте, comrades. Welcome to Socialism Saturday. Socialism Saturday is a stream where we watch real socialism on Saturday because apparently we have no lives. We have nothing better to do except sit here and watch some of the most dystopian stuff that you will see on the entire internet. We are not watching AOC socialism. We are not watching Bernie Sanders socialism. We're not watching CNN socialism. Oh no, 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 no. Compared to the people we watch on Socialism Saturday, they all look moderate and, slightly more sane than they do on a daily basis. So we watch the real deal. And the reason that we watch socialism is we want to know what the enemy is doing. And we want to understand their perspective. We want to understand how they see the world because you cannot defeat an enemy that you do not understand. You have to understand the way they view the world. Understanding the way they view the world is not the same as agreeing with them. You can think they're absolutely insane. You can call them names. You can talk about their mental health. You can do all of those things. But as soon as you start insulting your enemy is the moment that you give them an opportunity to defeat you. And make no mistake, the people that we are watching on Socialism Saturday are winning, and they're winning big time. And I think we're going to see actually a really good example of that today because last week we went back into the archives. We watched the Seattle Socialism Conference from 5 years ago. And when we were watching the Seattle Socialism Conference, I kind of started perusing the YouTube channel that we were watching this on, and I found just an absolute treasure trove of insanity. And so tonight, we are going back into the archive again, and we are going to be watching Mark Bray discuss the official anti-fascist handbook. You know, that thing that Jerry Nadler, like in 2020, Jerry Nadler was like, Antifa isn't real. It's just an idea. Well, then why do they have a handbook? How can something that is just an idea have an official handbook and a book tour to go along with it? That makes no sense. And remember, guys, because this is from 5 years ago, only has 2,000 views. 5 years ago, what has happened between now and 2017, 2018? Well, we had the riots of 2020 that resulted in the Chaz. And by the way, this is in Seattle. So this is not separated from the Chaz. This is, if you missed the Chaz back in 2020, oh, let me tell you what, just to give a brief overview for people who may not have been around, may not have remembered, I feel like I'm talking about something that everyone knows what it is, but it was a couple years ago, so conceivably people might not remember what it was. The Chaz was an autonomous zone that the socialists took over in the middle of Seattle. They appropriated a several square block radius. They completely cut it off from the rest of the city. They kicked all the police out. They took over the police station and they set up their own autonomous zone in the middle of Seattle called the Chaz. And it was actually a communist society. It was the summer of love, Shannon, exactly. It was the summer of love that resulted in 3 people dying. We call it the summer of love because the mayor of Seattle officially sanctioned and blessed the Chaz because it aligned with her politics until like 3 people died. And then they tore that shit down right quick. But the Chaz was crazy. I was going through my Twitter followers the other day because I'm kind of like, I'm culling my Twitter followers. I'm unfollowing a lot of people that I just think are too negative or crazy. And there was actually, the Chaz had an official Twitter account that was like posting all the crazy stuff that the Chaz did. I did not unfollow that account just in case the Chaz ever gets revived someday. I do want to know that the Chaz Twitter account is still alive and well. Nick Incognito says, I know it's coming. I'm tipping the queen in advance. Thank you, Nick. The Carlin is right tip jar is open. The rule on my channel is every time I am right and you are wrong, you owe me $2. And sometimes people pay me money for the tip jar, even when they're not wrong, but I get something right. Sin has also contributed to the Carlin is right tip jar. I do appreciate that, Sin. Thank you. Thank you. So this Antifa handbook, this talk that we're going to watch took place 3 years before the Chaz. And so it's always been my position on Socialism Saturday that if we go back into the archives and actually hear the socialist position from like 4, 5, 6 years ago, we're going to start seeing those talking points show up in the Democratic Party today. And there was nothing that is more of an indicator of that than this talk, which took place 3 years before the Chaz, an autonomous zone forming in Seattle, in which they really acted out, I'm sure, a lot of what's going to be in this handbook. So I'm actually really looking forward to hearing this talk from the author of the Antifa handbook. We just all need to remind ourselves as we're watching this that it was from a while ago. Okay. And what we're going to be listening for, and what I want everyone to listen for, is how much of what they talked about 5 years ago is actually going to show up in our world today. Because this is the farthest left of the far left, and their talking points are currently being shilled by Democrats on CNN today, which should terrify everyone. All right, guys, we do have a couple orders of business before we get started. You know what I forgot to do? I forgot to get my socialism bingo card out. Let me just get socialism bingo real quick, and I can put socialism bingo in the chat. Hang on. So we do play bingo on my channel when we're doing one of these things. Now, bingo is like an unofficial exercise. You don't have to do it. Let me just pop the link into the chat. There you go. Kurt already beat me to it. What's the bingo link again? I just put it into the chat. And so when you get your bingo card, thank you, Dragon Water, for the Carlin is right tip. I appreciate it. Leonard, I have not really been checking my emails today, but I'm sure that I did. But I've been busy all day, so I will take a look a little bit later. So what we do with the socialism bingo card is just click generate card. Everyone gets a different card. All the words should be different and the positioning should be different. Sometimes there's solidarity twice on the same card because I screwed up when I made it and I still haven't fit it. But congratulations if you got 2 solidarities, because that means you basically get a free square if they say solidarity, and like Lux for you. Then we go in the middle for our free square, and then we're going for lines or we're going for corners. And so if you get a bingo in the chat while we're watching Socialism Saturday, shout out bingo in the chat. And we will all give you a hearty round of applause, even though you won't win anything. But once we get one bingo, then we're going for blackout bingo. Michelle has arrived for her verbal lashing. Just so you guys know, this is a teaching channel, and I have been known to use the Socratic method. So if you say something in my chat that I don't think is correct, I might put you on the spot, because I want to make sure you're getting something out of this rather than just watching cringe content on the internet. And at the end of the day, I'm a teacher. It's what I do. Not in like school and stuff. I would never lower myself to be a teacher in school. No offense to teachers in schools, I guess. But I'm not indoctrinating kids all day, every day. But I do enjoy teaching people and imparting the knowledge that I know. So get ready if you're participating in the chat. It is a participatory exercise. A couple other orders of business before we get started is that the reason I'm able to do the work I do is because of my amazing supporters, not only on my Substack, but I also have supporters in my locals community. I have supporters on my Patreon. I do absolutely have supporters in my Substack. I have people who do super chats and make contributions to the channel through a channel membership and all that good stuff. And the only reason that I'm allowed to spend as much time writing articles for my Substack, doing these videos with you guys, is because I am funded by you. I made the very purposeful decision a couple of years ago that I did not want to be associated with any politically driven organization, because I want to be able to tell you the truth. I don't want to push a party line. I don't want to push talking points. Sometimes the left gets things right. It's rare, but it does happen. We need to acknowledge when it does. Sometimes the right turn into absolute unhinged lunatics, and we need to acknowledge when that happens. I'm not shilling for either of the major parties. I'm a libertarian. I don't really care, and I want to be able to tell you the truth. as I see it on any given day. Now, that can always change with new information, stuff like that. We always have to keep an open mind. But the reason that I'm able to do all this stuff is because of paid supporters on my Substack, on my locals, and in my Patreon. And I do try to give you guys a lot of content in return for your membership. For an instance, we've got this story from this week. The Michigan Department of Education is training their teachers on how to be groomers. And if you think I'm exaggerating, you don't believe me, guess what? We watched it live on my channel just the other day. We watched one presentation. I actually have a treasure trove of like 6 or 7 different presentations that I still need to go through. But we have all their files. It came directly from the Department of Education. We got it in their Google Drive. They didn't have a password protect thing on it or anything. Someone sent me the link, and you put stuff on Google Drive without a password, Michigan, that's what you get. And so we have all their presentations. We've been watching it, but I did break down the first one for you in this article, which is on my Substack, Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. And if you guys could sign up to support me with a paid membership for $5 a month, $50 a year while you're there, that would really be great. I'm very, very blessed that we have already met my supporter goal for this month. So thank you to all my new, wonderful, amazing supporters. I really do appreciate it. But guess what? It doesn't stop there, because I have a certain number I want to hit by the end of the year. So we got to keep on task. So I have a new goal for next month. In the month of March, I want to bring in at least 75 new paid supporters on my Substack. And so every supporter I get for the rest of this month is going to count towards next month's goal. So you don't have to wait till next month to get in on the goal. I'm just saying, don't think, oh, she met her goal, I don't need to do it. No, you do, because there's a certain number that I need to be able to do this stuff full time, and that's just the way it goes. And I really do appreciate it, guys. Every time you support the work I'm doing, you free up my time so I can spend more time doing this, less time doing consulting and stuff with other people that you guys don't hear about because I don't talk about it publicly, but it does happen because I need to pay bills and mortgages and stuff like that. Now, if you don't want to support me on Substack, there are other ways to do it. You can head over to activelyunwoke.com/support. All of the links are in the description below, and you can sign up on locals. You can sign up on Patreon. We've got the Substack link there too. You can also make a one-time gift, and all of those things will get you access to special supporter perks. To include 2 Zoom calls every single week. We do Zoom calls on Mondays at 7 p.m. We do them on Wednesdays at noon. If you are a supporter in my Substack, you have the links to the weekly Zoom calls. What you need to do is go to the Unwoke Roundup, which is my weekly email that covers all of the content that I made. And you need to scroll right down to the bottom, and it is under the supporter perks section. So when you are a paid supporter on Substack, this red box isn't going to be there. What is going to be there is a couple of links to my weekly community Zoom, so you can join us from my locals and Patreon and my Substack communities to come join us for a private unrecorded call on Monday or Wednesday. Another thing that is there is the link to my supporter Discord. So my supporter Discord is available to everyone supporting my work. And one of the things we do is we do a weekly movie night in my supporter Discord on Sundays at 8 p.m. Eastern. And tomorrow we are watching, I'm so excited. I love this movie. I'm so glad they picked it. I don't actually pick the movies for movie night. Like, there are people in my community that run this. And so I'm really excited that they picked Warm Bodies. It is one of my all-time favorites. It's so smart. It's so funny. It's got zombies. It's got romance. It's got great music. It's got great humor and writing. If you want to come and join us to watch Warm Bodies tomorrow at 8 p.m., it's as simple as making sure you're in the supporter Discord. I will be sending out links to the Discord to people in my locals, my Patreon, members on my YouTube channel. If you want a channel membership, that'll get you into the supporter Discord. And of course, if you're on my Substack as a supporter, you already have it under the supporter perks section of the newsletter that just came out today. And so you can come and join us in the Discord and watch movies with us on Sundays at 8 p.m., which will be really, really great. All right, guys, I think that's pretty much the last thing that I have, except that I'm going to pour myself a drink. Oh, we've got some rules to talk about. People in the chat are already been talking about the rules. So I'm going to be drinking. You guys know I don't really drink except for streaming. Basically, the only time I drink is when I'm on the internet, which is always a great idea. This week, I've got a beer called Spilled Psychedelics because I thought the can was really pretty. I always try to drink a red beer on Socialism Saturday. And this is an ice cream sour with cherry, vanilla, cinnamon, marshmallow, and it even has ice cream in the beer. A non-dairy ice cream in the beer. Let's pour this beer. We can see how it is. And while we're pouring the beer, I just want to remind everyone that I do have rules in my chat. I do not have an unmoderated chat. There are 2 rules. They're really simple. Number 1, don't be a dick. That means you don't insult me. You don't insult other people in the chat. We keep the environment nice for everyone. Look how, it's got floaty things. I'm a little scared of the floaty things, if I'm honest. But it is really pretty, isn't it? So don't be a dick. And then no whining. If I tell you to stop doing something in the chat, just stop doing it. It's really not that hard. I'm 41 years old. I don't want to hear whining all day, every day. I don't have kids for a reason. It's because I don't want to hear whining. If I don't have kids because I don't want to hear whining, I sure as shit don't want to hear whining in my chat. That's all it is. Now, additionally, with Socialism Saturday, because we are watching socialism, if you are new to this, you might not understand what they're saying. It is not you, it's them. Okay. Socialism is like speaking a completely different language. They may sound like they're speaking English, but it's not the same English that you speak, I promise you. And if you find yourself being confused, just ask in the chat what people are saying. You are allowed to ask questions. And we do also try to decipher what they're saying to kind of pick it apart and make sure we're explaining it. But I don't always know all the answers. We have a lot of very smart people who watch Socialism Saturday every single week, and they can help as well. But if you feel like you're lost, just hang out a minute. You're going to start learning their language, but you have to treat it as like we're like observing an alien species right now. And this is a species that takes 87 words to say something that they could probably say in like 8 to 10 words max. So they use very flowery language. They're going to sound like they're uber academic most of the time. If you don't understand them, just hang out. We will try to help you. And please make sure you ask questions in the chat if you have them. And that'll be perfect. All right, guys, let's dig into it. Again, we are watching the author of the Antifa handbook, which absolutely does not exist because Antifa is an idea, of course. This is a talk from 5 years ago. So this is pre-Chaz. And one of the things I want people to look for is how much of what this guy talked about is currently showing up in our world today. All right. Mount that like button, guys, if you're ready for Socialism Saturday. I'm really glad you joined me. Let's dig in.
Is very much a product of
the loud
volume.
Current political
moment.
Remember, the current political moment is November 11th, 2017. So they're talking about Trump being in office. Okay. When they're saying current political moment, Donald Trump is president, and these people are all terrified of him.
It grew out of what I saw as a need to have a broader historical and geographical perspective on the struggle against fascism and white supremacy, especially in the context of the growth of
That's
a kind of new wave of American Antifa organizing. In that way, I call the book a history, theory, and politics on the run. The purpose was to get this information out quickly rather than doing a kind of a decade-long study as professional historians often do. The focus of the book is on Europe and North America, based on over 60 interviews with current and former anti-fascists from 17 different countries. So I myself have a fair amount of organizing experience, but don't have organizing experience in anti-fascist movements. So the purpose of the book is to bring forth the experience and perspectives of people who have in the past and are currently doing this kind of work so that people can compare and contrast what they're doing today. The book focuses on the historical trajectory of what in English and Italian is called militant anti-fascism, what is often in French called radical anti-fascism, and in German called autonomous anti-fascism, which is to say a specific tradition within the anti-fascist history that exists at the crossroads of 2 related considerations. First is it's a pan-radical left politics of social revolution, self-defense applied to fighting the far right. It includes all sorts of socialists and communists and anarchists and leftists. It's an anti-capitalist politics. It's about fighting fascism, but it's also about building a new world and contesting the kind of...
So Antifa is anti-capitalist? I had no idea that Antifa is anti-capitalist. So it's not just about destroying fascism. So Antifa is using fascism and capitalism interchangeably. It's kind of like every time I say that whiteness doesn't mean your skin color, whiteness means capitalism. They're using these words interchangeably.
The claims to sovereignty of the state. Related to that, that segues into the second part, which is it's a strategy and tactics of direct action. Militant anti-fascists don't turn to the state or the police or courts or legislators to stop the far right. They argue that it's all of our jobs to do it. It has to be community response from the bottom up. And in that way, militant anti-fascism is sort of an implicit or explicit critique of the state as being the safeguard of society. So anti-fascism, there are different schools of anti-fascism. Part of the origin of militant anti-fascism was a kind of debate within the European left, where you had in the post-war period, socialist and communist parties that argued for stopping the far right by making it illegal. So in Germany, in Italy, and other countries, efforts to create a new Nazi party or a new fascist party
Exactly, Amazon Eve. I just want to say, I really like the surprise of Amazon Eve becoming a valued regular on Socialism Saturday, because Amazon Eve and I did not have the most pleasant of introductions to each other. And so I like this. I like it. Amazon Eve is saying liberation, such as Herbert Marcuse's essay on liberation. That's exactly right, Amazon Eve. Thank you. Isn't it nice when people who maybe sometimes have words with each other and have differences of opinion can put those differences aside, because as it turns out, we actually have more things to worry about than interpersonal squabbles and bullshit. I love it. I think it's a great example.
But moving later into the century, militant anti-fascists argued that the law was insufficient. So in a certain sense, it's kind of a debate within the European left over how to respond to the far right.
Ooh.
I think it's
Wait, Barb, is this book available for free? Seriously? Barb, can you drop a link in locals for the book being available for free? I would appreciate it.
important to think of the specific militant anti-fascist tradition and understand its contours and its historical context. But I think also sometimes definitions can be limiting. So in the process of writing the book, when I was thinking what is anti-fascism, I also wanted to think what was fascism? What is fascism? And that's a difficult conversation.
Capitalism.
Historians have debated what fascism is or is not. But I was influenced by what Ami Césaire had to say about the question when he argued that Nazism to some extent can be understood as European imperialism, colonialism, and genocide brought home to the European continent. That's been evident in a number of ways, from the fact that the Nazis didn't create the first concentration camps. Concentration camps had been built to imprison the indigenous population of the Americas. They were in Cuba, built by the Spanish monarchy in the Boer War and so forth. Nazi eugenics policies were greatly influenced by American eugenics policies and so forth. So if we take that as a point of departure and think of fascism as a specific variant of a global history of white supremacy and authoritarianism and genocide, then we can also think of
he is so close. He is so close to saying that fascism is capitalism. We're one step away. Guys, if we get him using the term whiteness or white supremacy and capitalism anywhere in this presentation, or really anywhere on the internet, then we now have evidence that these people think that fascism is the same as capitalism. Because he just said fascism is like white supremacy, is the delivery mechanism of white supremacy, which white supremacy for these people really means capitalism. Keep your ears open.
Anti-fascism explicitly understood as such, as just one strain of resistance to white supremacy around the world that goes back to 1492, to the first slave ships and so forth. So in that way, I think it's important to understand.
I think we might have just gotten it. He says white supremacy goes back to 1492 with the first slave ships. Why do I believe that going back to 1492 and the first slave ships means that he believes that white supremacy means capitalism? I think he's going to get there, Reagan. I do. Why would he think that white supremacy means capitalism if it's going back to 1492 and the first slave ships. Oh, George, I'm writing real life dystopia. I don't need to write about dystopian futures. I'm writing real life dystopia right now. Because America's founded on racism, slavery equals capitalism. Exactly. Exactly.
Understand the specific anti-fascist tradition, but also sort of provincialize it within the larger tradition of resistance. Always important to keep in mind. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to read an excerpt from the book to sort of bring some of this to life a little bit and talk about some conclusions and lessons we can draw from this history and then move forward from there. So the book is organized into chapters.
You guys are so good. Great answers.
The first three chapters are
answers.
History of the last century. The fourth chapter is Lessons from History for Anti-Fascists. The fifth chapter is all about free speech. So all of those debates you've been having with your friends, you can turn to chapter 5 and see some ways that anti-fascists have been talking about that. And then chapter 6 is about strategy, tactics, questions of violence, nonviolence, and so forth. So I'm going to read a little bit of the beginning of chapter 2, which is the immediate post-war history. Okay. The image of British Member of Parliament Mavis Tate flickers onto the screen. I, as a Member of Parliament, visited Buchenwald concentration camp with 9 others, she opens. Some people believe that the reports of what happened there are exaggerated. Cut to stacks of emaciated bodies in the back of a truck. No words could exaggerate, Tate clarifies. We saw and we know. A man attempts to shovel out charred skeletons from industrial ovens. The reality was indescribably worse than the pictures, she adds. Finally, she concludes, let no one say these things were never real. When the projection stopped in this small theater in northwest London in 1945, Maurice Beckman and his cousin Harry Rose filed out into the lobby. Newsreels such as this showed the world a sliver of Nazi horror, but it really wasn't until the 1970s that the Holocaust began to be perceived by both scholars and the general public as an historical event of major importance. But for Jews like Beckman and Rose, the horror could not be more palpable. They knew what post-war newsreels did not say, that most of the twisted corpses up on the screen belonged to adoring Jewish daughters, lovingly eccentric Jewish fathers, tough as nails Jewish grandmothers who gave a wry smile every time they recounted surviving the pogroms of their youth. Beckman and Rose didn't need to hear that from Mavis Tate. They were all too aware. They felt sick seeing those bodies like skeletons covered with skin. Both had served in the war, Beckman in the Merchant Marine and Rose in a unit that had fought behind Japanese lines in Burma. As Jewish veterans, Nazism could not have been more personal, and so as they walked home from the theater that day, they could not have been more appalled by what they came upon. A former 18B detainee, and in Britain the 18B detainees were those who had been imprisoned during the war for Nazi sympathies. So they're walking down the street in London in 1945. They come across an 18B detainee up on a platform shouting, "Not enough Jews were burned at Belsen. Not enough Jews were burned at Belsen." "I can't believe it," Rose exclaimed. Still wearing his uniform and medals, he went up to a nearby police officer who just shrugged and walked away. "Well, I'll get the bastard," Rose said, but his cousin held him back, fearing arrest. "But isn't anybody going to do something about this?" Rose exclaimed. Over the next few years, the members and sympathizers of the approximately 14 fascist groups in London waged a campaign against the Jewish population, with posters reading "Jews must go" and "War on the Jews." They attacked people in Jewish neighborhoods, they attempted to burn down synagogues, and they even threw bombs into a union meeting. Not long after holding back his cousin from attacking a fascist speaker, Beckman and 3 of his comrades came across another outdoor fascist meeting, this time organized by the British League of Ex-Servicemen and Women.
Hang on, just breaking news. Oh, shoot. Hang on. Update. Barb, for members of my locals, and by the way, guys, you can join my locals for free at kb.locals.com. You don't have to pay me to join. You just pay me if you want to become a supporter or comment on things or stuff like that. But Barb has just posted a link to the Anti-Fascist Handbook in locals as requested. Barb, thank you so much for doing that. I really appreciate it. So if you guys would like a copy of the Anti-Fascist Handbook, the PDF is now available in my locals. And again, you can get there and join for free at kb.locals.com, and there should be, a link down below somewhere.
Just as an aside, note that after the war, when the fascists came back, they chose really innocuous names for their groups. They didn't call themselves the British Union of Fascists anymore. They called themselves the British League of Ex-Servicemen and Women, right? So when we're having these conversations, it's always important to not take these groups at face value necessarily. Anyway, that day, Jeffrey Ham, formerly of the British Union of Fascists, was denouncing the, quote, aliens in our midst who profited while our boys fought overseas. The Jewish veterans had enough. This group of four, which included a former judo expert of the Welsh Guards, a Royal Air Force pilot, Beckman, and another veteran, spread out into the crowd of 60. As the judo expert was pretending to buy copies of the League newspaper, he suddenly smashed together the heads of the two fascist stewards, while Beckman and the others toppled the stage, dispersing everyone. Beckman explained that the sheer malevolence of the speaker moved him and his comrades to shut down a post-war fascist meeting for the first time. It would not be the last time. This direct action sparked the formation in March 1946 of the 43 Group, a militant anti-fascist organization composed mainly, though not exclusively, of Jewish British veterans dedicated to shutting down fascism through direct action and pursuing legislation against racist incitement. The 43 Group commando units had several methods of shutting down fascist meetings. If a single member could get through the fascist guards to tip over the platform, the police had a policy of not allowing the fascists to set it up again. So, with that in mind, the group organized units of about a dozen into wedge formations. They would start far back out into the crowd and at an agreed upon time build up steam so that they could plow through many times their numbers of muscular fascists and knock over the stage. But after a while, the fascists saw this coming, so they brought extra protection up to the platform. So if that were the case, the commandos had a plan B. They would disperse out into the crowd and start arguments and fights all over to the point where the chaos forced the police to shut down the event. Another method was to jump the pitch by occupying the fascist meeting space well before they could get set up. So by the summer of 1946, the 43 Group was attacking approximately 6 to 10 fascist meetings a week. We can't gloss over the fact that in London in 1946, there were 6 to 10 fascist meetings a week, which is horrible and something that a lot of people don't know. Anyway, Beckman estimates that about a third were disrupted by the group, a third shut down by police, and a third continued as planned. After a while, the 43 Group became so successful that locals would join them or even shut down fascist events using similar tactics on their own. With the emergence of the, quote, fucking hard case East End Yids, as the black shirts called them, the, quote, keep your head down and get indoors quickly mentality had gone for good. So what can we learn from the example of the 43 Group? Well, I think there's a few points that we can take from this. The first, I think, is that even in small doses, fascism can be really dangerous. So if you read, for example, the way that historians have talked about the late 1940s in Britain, they acknowledge that, sure, there was a revival of fascist organizing in Britain, but they point out that compared to the overall situation, fascism was really small and wasn't a major player in the late 40s in Britain. And that's true, right? These post-war fascist groups did not have mass memberships. But if you were a Jewish person in the East End of London who had your synagogue defaced and your brother had been attacked and you were afraid to walk out your front door, then for you, this was an awfully big deal. And so I think that even if fascist groups don't grow, it's incumbent upon us to recognize that all too often the people who are under attack are not the people that get the sympathy and attention of the broader population. And in that way, I think anti-fascism poses a really important perspective when thinking about mass politics. I think a kind of one-dimensional mass politics would have us sort of take an opinion poll of the entire society about what kinds of strategies and methods are palatable and work towards a strategy that way. But if we're in a situation where many people in society are not sympathetic to the plight of those who are under attack, then that complicates the picture. If we think about, for example, the Battle of Cable Street of 1936, I think that's a good example to think through. So what happened is about a decade before the events we're thinking about here, the British Union of Fascists, which was...
Is anyone else hearing this and kind of thinking like, it really does sound like the far left took this playbook and we've been seeing this playbook play out I mean, really heavily, definitely when Trump was president, but it's just been escalating and escalating and escalating. It's like, it's not even like an indirect translation, it's like a direct translation from this playbook.
The sort of predecessor of this organizing, planned a march through the East End of London. On the day of the march, about 6,000 fascists showed up, but they were confronted by more than 100,000 anti-fascists and Jews and other kinds of immigrants and leftists and so forth. And so ultimately, the march was canceled by the police before it could even take its first step. And this was claimed as sort of a great moment in the history of Western European anti-fascism. Hurrah, right? But if you read British newspapers the day after the Battle of Cable Street, do you think that they were really happy about this? No, right? They considered it to be a kind of uncivilized, quote unquote, response. And they quoted the fascist leadership, which claimed the anti-fascist destroyed our, quote, freedom of speech. So those kinds of debates go back a century. And there have been many cases over the years when fascists have turned to that argument as a way to legitimize their organizing. So anyway, the point being, if you had turned to the majority of British society in 1936 and said, how do you think the Jews who are under attack in the East End of London should respond to these fascists? The majority perspective probably would have been, well, write a letter to your member of parliament and hold a sign on the side of the street. So if you think that that would have been perhaps insufficient, then it's worth thinking about how communities and populations that are under attack need to not always just play by the playbook of those who don't have skin in the game when it comes to responding.
Wow.
But even when fascism grows to the point of taking over a regime, we can see that in 1919, Mussolini started out with 100 men in his first fascist nucleus. When Hitler attended his first meeting of the German Workers' Party before the name changed to the Nazi Party, at that time, the party had 54 members, right? So post-war anti-fascists have argued, considering that sometimes, of course not always, but sometimes fascist movements start really small and grow big, that every neo-Nazi skinhead and clan group should be treated as if they could be Mussolini's 100 or Hitler's 54. And it's better to treat these more seriously than they arguably merit than less seriously and be wrong. A recent example of that could be the Golden Dawn in Greece, which was a microscopic fascist party for decades, but then after the financial crisis of 2008, balloons to be the third largest party in Greece, fully outfitted with a fascist goon squad that attacks all sorts of people they deem undesirable. And I met with some anti-fascists in Greece in 2012 who were kicking themselves for not taking this more seriously a few years earlier. So this is something that can always happen. Also, I think the example of the 43 group shows that militant anti-fascist methods can be awfully effective. They started in 1946 with 43 members, which is why they were called the 43 group. They were having a meeting trying to discuss what to call themselves. Debates were going back and forth. And after a while, someone in the back of the room says, there's 43 of us, let's call ourselves the 43 group and be done with it, which I think is a wonderful example of expediency and organizing. So anyway, a few years later, their membership grew up, I think probably hit a peak around 300. And by 1949, they disbanded because the fascist threat in their perspective had receded. There are plenty of other examples that I discuss in the book and many more.
Actually, this is a really great point that I want to make sure to highlight. This is the speech is violence crowd. Exactly. Although the amount of conservatives who have told me in the last 24 hours that my speech is violence is giving me pause, I have to tell you, and that's actually real. So this isn't just for leftists anymore. But the bigger point is if speech is violence, if speech you don't like is violence, then actual violence in response is justified. This is not a trap we can fall into, guys. Honestly. And I'm saying this looking at all of the conservatives over the last 24 hours who have told me that adults having a conversation that they find distasteful is speech, and it is violence rather, which has happened on Twitter specifically. Of course, Twitter is not real life, but these are adults saying your conversations should not be allowed because I find them distasteful. In this case, they were about the age of consent. You can have whatever opinion you want about that. I personally don't participate in these conversations, but I don't actually find them to be violence. It's a conversation among voluntary adults. But the point is, you cannot fall into this. Do not become the monster that you hate, because the minute that the right starts to perceive speech as violence is the minute that we are all truly fucked, because then both sides are going to be irrevocably corrupted.
That I don't, of anti-fascist methods
Oh,
being successful in stopping.
hang on, we got a super chat. I apologize. I started too soon. They always talk about the buyer, but never the race of the sellers. Their own people. North America was one of the ones that bought the least amount of slaves. 300,000 out of 12 million sold around the world. I mean, I think that this is a fair point, but what I also want you to hear is that this is not about slavery. This is not about racism. It's not about any of those things. They use skin color, they use slavery, they use the guise of racism to get people to react, because these are heated topics that, quite frankly, justly piss people off. But what I really want you to hear is that people like this guy don't care about any of that. They don't care about solving racism. They don't care about the lasting impact of slavery on Black Americans. They don't care about your skin color. They only care about utilizing those things to be able to sow discontent, to be able to get people riled up so that they can destabilize the system through riots and such, as they did in 2020, or through the creation of a Chaz in Seattle, as they did that same year. And they want to do it to destabilize things, because when they destabilize things, that's when they can attack capitalism and blame capitalism for everything. And they do believe that slavery was the result of capitalism. So they want to blame every bad thing in society on capitalism so that they can usher in their Marxist utopia. So don't fall for it when they're trying to make you think that this is about racism or the impact of slavery or your skin color or any of those things. It isn't about any of that at all. It is simply about using those things that fire people up very easily to destabilize things so that they can usher in Marxism.
These groups. The irony of the conversation, though, is that militant anti-fascism works its best when people don't know about it, because if you stop a group before it grows, no one cares that you stop them. So that's kind of the irony of it. Even if you look at the American Anti-Racist Action Network, had a lot of really significant victories and achievements, but it didn't get to the point where mainstream society was especially concerned about the far right, and therefore it wasn't even part of a conversation. Most
anti-racism is just Marxism in disguise.
Americans don't even know what happened. What else? Okay. Did that one. A few of the things that post-war anti-fascists have kind of concluded from the early history when they look at organizing efforts against Mussolini and Hitler. All right, I'm a little fried. I'm doing this a lot. My Mussolinis and Hitlers sometimes get blended into Mussolini Hitler. All right, organizing against Mussolini in Italy and Hitler in Germany. Okay, got those straight. They point to the fact that the European left largely failed to get on the same page to combat the common enemy. So if you look at Italy, the Arditi del Popolo was the militant anti-fascist militia that was formed in 1921 to take up rifles and go to defend villages and towns against the fascist black shirts. Initially, it was a pan-radical left militia, but shortly thereafter, the Socialist Party withdrew their support. The new Communist Party withdrew their support. So towards the end, the only institutional support the Arditi had came from the anarchist movement, though rank and file members from all factions continued. Excuse me. Similarly, or even more pronounced in Germany, especially after 1928, when the Communist International labeled socialists, quote, social fascists, and socialists who are no more fond of communists, the German left was more preoccupied with their internal struggle than opposition to the Nazis. In part, that was because really until the Great Depression, the Nazi Party was microscopic. But even when Hitler took power in 1933, the slogan of the German Communist Party was, perhaps the slogan that has aged the worst of any slogan I can think of, was first Hitler, then us. By which they meant they figured Hitler would get into power, he'd do a terrible job in government, and then 6 months, 9 months later, the Communist Party could ride his coattails into successful government. So why on earth did they think that? Well, I think in part
That's
because
crazy, actually. That's fascinating.
Anti-fascists in the 20s and 30s did not really understand that fascism represented something different from traditional European reactionary politics. So reaction had existed in European politics since there was revolution, right? There had been repression of the Paris Commune, of the revolution of 1905. Early anti-fascists in the 20s compared the fascists to the white guards in Russia or the black and tans in the British Isles. And there was an understanding this is kind of cyclical. They didn't necessarily recognize that fascism and Nazism posed existential threats to, well, most people or a lot of people. So they were willing to say, okay, fine, this will be a period of reaction starting in 1933. Maybe in 1934, we'll push back in the other direction. But that wasn't what happened. So that's, I think, one reason why I think it's incumbent upon us to always pay attention to shifts and changes in far-right politics. Never assume it's always the same. Never assume it's always going to take the same kind of resistance to stop it, because I think that was something that the European left did. But it wasn't so much just the European left as a whole. It was more the leadership of these parties, because if you actually look at where the initiatives for pan-radical left unity, for anti-fascist unity came, they often came from below, and arguments for aggressive militant responses often came from the lived experiences of people who had their neighborhoods and their union halls and their taverns attacked and destroyed and taken over, who said, you know what, we cannot wait for the next election. We need to organize now. So I think that's also another kind of lesson to be taken from this. Really, I think that you can see at a high level, the European left start to take it seriously a little bit in 1934 with the socialist resistance to a right-wing government in Austria. That same year, a right-wing government took over the Spanish Republic. And when there was a miners' uprising in...
Is it striking anyone else that these people seem to not... It's not really anti-fascist because they consider everyone who is on the right to be fascists? Is there anyone that can be on the political right or more conservative that they don't consider to be fascists? Carlin, you must look into crime. They are an activist publishing company that teaches how to plan and get away with illegal direct action. Banana bread, I am writing that down right now. Crime thick. Got it. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
In Asturias in northern Spain, their slogan was better Vienna than Berlin. Because in Vienna, in Austria, the socialists rose up against the right-wing government. In Berlin, they did not. So you start to see a shift where the European left is saying, we can't let this continue. And then you have the Spanish Civil War, when leftists across the political spectrum, at least for 6 months, 9 months on the face of things, were on the same page. That didn't work out so well. We can talk about that in the Q&A if you want to. But certainly the threat was treated with the gravity it deserved. There was kind of an anti-fascist domino theory. If we don't stop fascism in Spain, it'll threaten all sorts of other places. Now, this history is sort of well charted.
Guys, I just want to welcome anyone new that's never been to Socialism Saturday before. We watch Real Socialism on Saturdays at 6 p.m. Today we are watching a presentation from 5 years ago from the author of the Anti-Fascist Handbook, talking about his perspective of the world. If you're new here, welcome. We hope you hang out with us for a while. And please mount that like button if you appreciate that we're doing this here tonight. And if you have questions, please feel free to chat them in, and someone, possibly me, someone else in the chat, will help answer them. Listening to socialists can be a little confusing if you've never done it before. And so please feel free to ask questions in the chat.
But the post-war history is less so. Literature that exists in English does a good job charting this history in Britain, not so well elsewhere. As we talked about, fascism reemerged in Britain in the 40s, but moving into the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the far right in Britain shifted from targeting the Jewish population primarily to targeting new waves of migration from the Caribbean, South Asia, and elsewhere. The Fascist National Front organized a Keep Britain White campaign and helped to foster the growth of a neo-Nazi skinhead movement. For those who don't know, skinhead culture and tradition was originally anti-racist, and there's been an anti-racist current in it up through to today.
What?
But in the 70s, there was an effort to make this about white power politics. So
is that true?
This was an important cultural influence in the growth of the far right in Europe.
He just said that the original skinhead movement was anti-racist. Is that true? I don't know the answer to that. I'm asking someone smarter than me in the chat to answer that question. Probably Kurt.
North America and elsewhere during this period. And in response to that, anti-fascists in Britain organized the Rock Against Racism concert series.
Yeah, people are saying no,
with
that's
bands
not
like The
true.
Clash and The Specials, Steel Pulse, and others.
That's what I thought.
And historians of music credited Rock Against Racism with it being the first time that white British society as a whole came into sustained contact with Jamaican music, which I think is an interesting thing to point out. Similar developments were happening on the continent, but as I mentioned at the outset, under different circumstances. So in Britain, the far right was essentially allowed to reorganize right off the bat. And in that way, the militant anti-fascist tradition in Britain from the 1920s to the present is largely unbroken. You can trace the individuals and groups each generation through. It was a little different in continental Europe, where the governments that emerged out of the ashes of World War II established themselves as officially anti-fascist institutions. That was true in the East and in the West. Even the original name for the Berlin Wall was the Anti-Fascist Defensive Barrier. If you're curious why that was, that you can make a note of that for the Q&A, but I'm not going to get into that here. And so the idea was that the governments weren't going to allow this to happen, again, by making it illegal. That had mixed results, but by the 70s, 80s, and 90s, in different countries, a far-right presence had reemerged. In Germany, especially around the fall of the Berlin Wall, a neo-Nazi skinhead movement, to some extent influenced by developments in Britain, started to attempt to burn down refugee centers and attack all sorts of people. A member of the American Olympic bobsled team was assaulted. Amnesty International issued a report condemning the inactivity of the German government. And so the response to that on the street was largely done by the autonomous movement and their transition into an autonomous anti-fascist movement. Some of these groups in the late 80s and 90s were actually organized by Turkish migrants for self-defense. And you can see in some of the early periodicals, the texts were in German and Turkish. So that's where you have the origin of the Black Bloc tactic. Black Bloc is not an organization or a group. It is a street tactic of people who...
You know, what's really funny is, so for those who don't know, you might be new to me, I left the Democratic Party accidentally very publicly in 2020. I didn't leave the party accidentally. I left the party purposefully. I just didn't mean to be like a public thing, and it accidentally was. And so when that happened, I was kind of like waffling between two worlds, where I had still a lot of friends who were very lefty, very Democrat, very bought into the media narrative. And because my leaving the party was so public, I all of a sudden had all these new friends who were totally red pilled, saw what was going on, saw through all the bullshit. And one of the things that got me to leave the party was I watched a lot of like just the Antifa footage that exists on YouTube, to be honest. I would sit there and watch Tim Pool walk around these protests for like 5 hours, just filming everything at these protests and showing people what was really going on. And so I knew what Antifa was. I knew what Black Bloc looked like. And so when the riots in 2020 started, I was trying to explain to my lefty friends, like, no, this is Antifa. This is who they are. This is how you know to identify them. They're going to wear black. They're going to carry umbrellas. They're going to do this. They're going to do that. And do you know what my lefty friends would say to me? I swear to God, this is a real conversation. One of them was like, Carlin, do you have Antifa confused with Black Bloc? Because Antifa are a peaceful folk who just want to fight fascists, and they're not the same thing as Black Bloc. You just must have them confused. And I was like, I'm pretty sure I'm not the one who's confused here. Antifa and Black Bloc are exactly the same thing. And like Black Bloc is the militant group of Antifa activists that show up at these protests wearing black, carrying umbrellas because they want to be able to block what you're seeing. They're like, no, Carlin, Antifa are a peaceful folk, and this is pretty much when my relationship with my lefty friends started to fall apart. There were skinheads against racial prejudice. I think Gavin McGinnis talked about it one time. They were called sharps. All right, good to know. And I did see some other people in the chat saying there is some truth to what he was saying about skinheads being anti-racist, but it also seems to be kind of mixed, and you have the punk scene in there as well. So who the hell knows? But it does seem like there were groups that might classify themselves as skinheads who were indeed, quote unquote, anti-racist.
carry out militant activities under a kind of veil of anonymity by dressing uniformly in black and covering their faces. We can talk about that more later if you're interested, but it grew out of that period. And I think really in post-war European anti-fascism, the two kind of most influential trajectories would be the British and the German. If we go over to the case of the United States, certainly we can think we ought to recognize that the peoples of the Americas have been no stranger to resisting white supremacy or domination. When we think of when fascism started, some have argued for seeing maybe the KKK as the first proto-fascist formation. And if you are sympathetic to that, then certainly anti-Klan resistance could be considered a kind of anti-fascism. Likewise, looking at groups like the Black Panthers, the American Indian movement, talking about the fascism of police occupation, of colonialism and so forth, we can talk about it through there. But in terms of those who were explicitly influenced by the specifically militant anti-fascist tradition, you can pretty much start with Anti-Racist Action, which formed in the late 1980s and grew in the 90s to be a network with hundreds of chapters and thousands of members across North America. They developed 4 points of unity, which I think are helpful to think through the politics of what this is about. The first was we go where they go. So an argument for always having a counter-protest, always having a response when the far right mobilizes. This may be out of order, but that doesn't matter. We don't turn to the police or the state to stop the far right. So that's a key tenet to this politics, arguing for popular resistance, not trusting the state or the police. A defense of reproductive rights, because some of what anti-racist action did was to show up at abortion clinics and defend reproductive rights from what they considered to be Christian fascists, and non-sectarian defense of all anti-fascists.
Christian pro-lifers are Christian fascists. Now, listen, I have no love lost for pro-lifers. I think pro-lifers, no offense to any, I fundamentally differentiate between pro-lifers, like the activists, and like people who just happen to be pro-life. It's kind of like there are gay people and there are trans people that are just trying to live their lives. And then there are the trans activists, and those people are crazy. I kind of think the same about pro-lifers. There are people who hold a pro-life position, and it is perfectly reasonable to hold a pro-life position. I'm not talking about you, but then you have pro-lifers that are crazy. You do. Pro-lifers, you do. Admit it. Anyway, I disagree with the assertion, though, that pro-lifers are fundamentally fascist because they have a pro-life position. They're crazy, don't get me wrong, but to call them fascist, that seems a little bit much.
So pan-radical left politics. But you can see that within those points of unity, there's a lot of room for people from all sorts of perspectives to get on board. And so that helped it grow and really establish itself as an important youth culture, pushing back against the far-right presence in the punk scene and other alternative cultures. Anti-racist action groups went to schools and did popular educational events and participated in Palestine solidarity campaigns and did a wide variety of organizing. They were influenced by the example of anti-fascist action in Britain, but chose to label themselves anti-racist action because they thought that language worked better in the context of the US. And what's interesting is I'm sure there are some folks in the audience who are well-versed in recent anti-fascist developments and are familiar with the two main symbols of anti-fascism, the one being the 3 arrows, the other being the 2 flags. And we can talk about where they came from if people are curious, but looking at anti-racist action periodicals from the 90s, it's striking to see they're not there. They weren't really symbols that were used by ARA in the 90s too much. You can really see their use growing from the greater awareness that American anti-fascists had of the European history, but specifically the German history, starting in the late 2000s into the early 2010s, when you start to have groups calling themselves not necessarily ARA, but Antifa, like Rose City Antifa in Portland, NYC Antifa, and so forth. A similar change happened in Britain around the same time. The symbolism of the British anti-fascist action was largely the red triangle, taken from the example of the Holocaust as a symbol for the persecution of socialists, but they reclaimed it as an anti-fascist symbol. But starting in the late 2000s, early 2010s, greater influence from Germany with the symbols of the German movement. So I'm interested in symbols. There's a little symbol history. I'm going to say a few more things and then we'll open it up. How are we doing? Is Grace around? How are we doing on time? All right. Yeah, okay. I'll say a few more things and then we'll take like 1 or 2 and then we'll open it. All right. So When I speak to journalists, which I have done, about this topic, they're like, oh, I'm interested in learning about anti-fascism, but they're really only interested in masks and violence and masks.
That's not COVID masks.
So what I try to explain is that the militant anti-fascist tradition.
As a reminder, just for people who may have joined since we started, this is a presentation from 5 years ago. So when he is saying mask, he doesn't mean COVID mask. This was pre-COVID. He means the mask that they wear. I just want to make sure that's clear, because that wouldn't have been an issue 5 years ago, but it might be an issue of misunderstanding today.
Has a broad range of organizational forms and looks and histories, and there is no one box to put it into. This was brought home to me by some comments made to me by an anti-fascist from Madrid named Daniel, who explained that in his perspective there are two faces of anti-fascism, and he said we must never forget either face. The first is that which stops the organizing of the far right, prevents them from embedding.
But not like new Wolfenstein. I like old school Wolfenstein. I like Wolfenstein circa like 1997-ish Wolfenstein. That fucking game was the best. I played that game so much. Anyway.
Themselves in communities, normalizing their heinous ideas, becoming legitimate in any way. The other is that which aims to inoculate society from the appeals of fascism, so that when there's an economic depression, people don't blame immigrants, they organize with their coworkers, they organize in their communities, and therefore anti-fascism becomes self-evident common sense and not sort of a quote-unquote professionalized activity. Not to suggest that anti-fascists are being paid by Soros, because that is not true. If anyone wants to know, that's not true. So anyway, I think that there's more to be said about that, but I want to not go on too long. This is a wide political field, and there's a lot of different ways this can look and take, and it's important to have all of them as a movement. So I'll leave it at there. Let's take a couple questions and then take a book break. In the back, yes.
Hi, yeah, my name's Jared. I'm a member of Freedom Socialist Party. I was interested in what you said about, just what you said about the inoculation. And also before you were talking about the anti-fascist movements being notwithstanding in history, and I wonder if there's kind of a link between that, and the link being, the immediate need, which is to, form a united front to stop fascism.
I hope he repeats the question.
Have that movement extend to, a united group on the left that would then, enact, for instance, revolution. And
sure. Right. And that's a key part of the politics. Militant anti-fascists don't just want to stop fascism. And I read an interview that's coming out soon on It's Going Down, so keep an eye out for it, that some comrades did with a...
You don't say. Militant anti-fascists don't just want to solve fascism. You don't say.
German member of the autonomous movement who's been active since the 80s. And he explained that in his perspective, to some extent, the anti-fascist movement was sort of a recruiting tool to try and build a revolutionary movement. And so for him, fighting fascism was only sort of one part of the conversation. And certainly the ways that militant anti-fascists have chosen to fight fascism are also sort of a prefigurative challenge to the sovereignty of the state, are fundamentally anti-capitalist kinds of perspectives. So certainly...
Hang on, I think there was a question that was supposed to go with that. Have I ever played D&D? I haven't. I've dated people who played D&D. They've tried. I was never really into those types of games. So sadly, I have no experience with that.
The interview subjects I spoke to would, I think, all agree that if you don't stop the causes of fascism, fascism is always a threat. One of them obviously is capitalism. Wait, did you just say they're anti-capitalist? Patriarchy.
Shit, I missed it. I was so focused on the D&D question, I missed it. Hang on, I need to... Thank you, guys. Thank you for paying attention when I wasn't. This is why we do this as a team. I just need to rewind a little bit.
To try and build a revolutionary movement. And so for him, fighting fascism was only sort of one part of the conversation. And certainly the ways that militant anti-fascists have chosen to fight fascism are also sort of a prefigurative challenge to the sovereignty of the state, are fundamentally anti-capitalist kinds of perspectives. So
ding, ding,
certainly
ding, ding, ding. Well done.
The interview subjects I spoke to would...
The 4 goals of the woke left are always and forever: gain as much power as possible, destabilize the system, attack capitalism, usher in the Marxist utopia. That is what they want. Antifa are not just a peaceful folk that are fighting fascists. Antifa want to overthrow capitalism.
I think all agree that if you don't stop the causes of fascism, fascism is always a threat. One of them obviously is capitalism. Others are patriarchy, white supremacy, et cetera, et cetera. So in that way, you can the cheesy metaphor that I like to use is seeing anti-fascism as a kind of accordion that can be opened or closed depending on what note you're trying to play. You can close it and say, okay, this is militant anti-fascism, or open it up and say, well, actually, it's revolution, and everything in between. So yes.
Oh, it's revolution. Oh, you don't say.
Yes, over here.
I just want to know what you think about Chomsky's quote on
Sure.
And,
yeah.
What he said about how it's a minuscule fringe on the left and that it's a major gift to the right.
Sure. So for those who don't know, Noam Chomsky was critical of militant anti-fascism, saying, among other things, that it's fringe and that it is a gift to the far right. I love Noam Chomsky. It gives me no pleasure to disagree with Noam Chomsky, but I disagree with Noam Chomsky. Just to say a few things, there is actually a fairly substantive historical track record of militant anti-fascist organizing working. He did not make reference to that. I think that's one place to start, is that we can have a legitimate conversation on the pros and cons of different forms of politics, but it should be in reference to what's actually happened. So I'm not sure his familiarity with that history, but that history is relevant. In that history is all sorts of examples of the far right not being too happy about Antifa. Even today, we can see that the far right go to great lengths to prevent anti-fascists from finding out where their events are, who their identities are, so they don't get doxxed, from organizing self-defense. And so if they're really...
You think that the right is trying to prevent people from knowing who they are? Because every time I see Antifa at protests, they're wearing masks. Every single time. Antifa have like secret meetings and secret locations. Antifa, you have to know like a code word or something to get into these things. You're telling me it's the far right that's hiding? Okay, projection.
Really psyched about being doxxed and shut down. Why would they bother? They'd say, here we are, come shut us down. So I think that the way that far right movements grow is not entirely dissimilar to how left movements grow, right? You need to have bases in the community. You need to engage in projects. You need to meet people's needs. You need to normalize your perspective so they are seen as common sense. You need to put out your information in the web, in person, flyers, have events, become part of society. And so it seems to me to stop that is you stop all those little facets, which is essentially what militant anti-fascist politics are. It's no panacea. It's not like this organizing strategy always works, because no organizing strategy always works. But I think that as a whole, it has a strong legacy. And I don't know of a better way to stop these people than to stop them.
Has there always been a critique of this strategy?
There's always been a critique of every strategy. But certainly, you know, the main conversation in the European left was, do we stop them, quote unquote, respectably by making it illegal and then basically turning it to the police to stop them? Or do we organize to shut them down ourselves? Or there have been some that have argued for both.
I would think that he would know the history.
I don't know what he does or does not know, but I do know that in his quotes, he hasn't referenced that history. So, how about we do a book break, Grace?
What is a book break?
Let's just take 5 minutes. So for people who want to pick up the book.
Oh, to sell his book.
For acquiring my book.
To sell his book. Oh, you mean the guy promoting anti-fascism is taking a break so that people can engage in capitalism? Oh, my word. Now, as a reminder for people who are about to be like, why do Marxists feel like they can sell their book? Isn't that capitalism? Well, it is capitalism, but they're allowed to do it because they're not part of the bourgeoisie. They are simply trying to exist and survive in the system of capitalism. And so they allow themselves that privilege because they're still trying to override the system, which makes it okay for them to engage in capitalism.
And then we will reconvene.
Hopefully they just edit it.
Did you want to?
They edited it. Good.
Yeah.
I was just
wondering if there are significant differences between both fascist and anti-fascist organizing, like in the U.S. and Europe.
Okay,
And maybe
great.
what one or two of those might be.
Yeah, sure. So certainly there have been, so the cultural milieu is one thing to talk about. So I mean, to be Antifa in Europe often has a very strong cultural component, connected to football, connected to music. There are plenty of people who identify as such, who don't necessarily do organizing, but will show up to a demo or think of themselves as such in the context of pushing fascists out of football scenes and so forth.
Capitalism break.
There is a growing component of that in the US. There are anti-fascist supporters groups at many different MLS teams and so forth. The music component goes back farther, certainly in the punk scene of the 80s and 90s, but that's sort of like, as a slightly different kind of connotation that's often missed in the conversation, is that it's also kind of a cultural marker. The other thing is I keep coming back to this, but I think it's really interesting to understand, is that militant anti-fascism is sort of one side of a debate within the left in Europe about how to respond to these things. And so you have a situation where this, like, the state in Germany is, we are anti-fascist. So there's a contestation over who are the anti-fascists in a way that the American government does not claim to be anti-fascist, doesn't even know what that really means. So I spoke to one anti-fascist who was organizing in Germany, and he explained to me that for him and his comrades, it was important to, going back to sort of the question over here, always put forth a kind of revolutionary anti-capitalist critique while they did their anti-fascist work, because if they didn't, they'd essentially be just sort of mirroring the perspective of the government, and therefore...
Are you saying that Antifa is overtly anti-capitalist? Let me just rewind that. I'm going to clip that real quick, guys, because that was probably the best clip that I've seen yet on that particular point, and I want to make sure I have it. Please be patient as I clip this and we watch it again. Thank you.
Europe about how to respond to these things. And so you have a situation where this, like, the state in Germany is, we are anti-fascist. So there's a contestation over who are the anti-fascists in a way that the American government does not claim to be anti-fascist, doesn't even know what that really means. So I spoke to one anti-fascist who was organizing in Germany, and he explained to me that for him and his comrades, it was important to, going back to sort of the question over here, always put forth a kind of revolutionary anti-capitalist critique while they did their anti-fascist work, because if they didn't, they'd essentially be just sort of mirroring the perspective of the government, and therefore not really kind of advancing a broader struggle. That's a consideration that doesn't really exist here. And also, I mean, the question of free speech becomes very different, because if you have governments that are making it illegal for these groups to organize, then it changes the whole conversation about speech. In the Anglo-American tradition, that's a different kind of orientation than in those other countries. Those are a few things that come to mind along those lines. And then just to comment quickly on kind of far-right organizing, there has been a greater influence of the kind of identitarian French New Right on American far-right organizing.
French New Right.
So Richard Spencer with the alt-right, and that was influenced by this kind of European...
Richard Spencer voted for Joe Biden. Richard Spencer denounced Donald Trump and voted for Joe Biden because Richard Spencer thought that Joe Biden was much more aligned with his interests than Donald Trump. Chew on that.
Perspective of, in short, taking a page out of kind of struggles for national liberation by portraying white people and whiteness as kind of one demographic with its own claim to rights the same as other demographics.
Steve asked, have I ever done a book signing at a bookstore or library like this? Not for actively Unwoke, but I did do stuff like this for my first book. It's a trip, man. It really is. I once did a book signing. I did like book signings at conferences and things. And at like the first ever book signing I did, I was scared that no one would show up. And then I shit you not, there was like a line that went out and down the hall, and I was like, okay, that's actually pretty cool. So not my book came out when it was still kind of like pandemic time, so I didn't really do like events like this with it. But my first book didn't, so.
And trying to shift from the kind of outwardly white supremacist rhetoric to a more explicitly white nationalist, but still white supremacist rhetoric. So there's been sort of some of those influences as well. Yes,
Yeah, some of this sounds like the things that I've seen in going all the way back to the anti-war movement 40 plus years ago,
Hmm.
where you would have a mass march
Mhm.
organized by a large coalition,
Mhm.
and then you would have some people who wanted to break off and
Sure.
maybe dress differently or
Sure.
like smash windows or
Yeah.
do more, in their mind, more militant action.
Right. Yeah.
And the usual way of, and I saw something very similar here in June 10th, when we had a very good march against the Islamophobic groups at City Hall. And it was like 100 times larger than the
Mhm.
alt-right people.
Sure.
But I could see that what was going on was you had the neo-fascists
Mhm.
deliberately moving in,
Mhm.
trying to push into that march and start fights.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
it reminded me of the fact that when you have someone who is a fascist, he's not afraid of being punched in the face. They want to be punched in the face because now they want their
Mhm.
picture taken, be punched, and then that justifies their victimhood.
Understood.
So the way this was dealt
Mhm.
with in the anti-war and the civil rights movement
Mhm.
was you always would get the people who are physically
Hang on,
strong
Jennifer's making a great observation, and I think this is Jennifer's first time here, so welcome. I've noticed that these Antifa types will turn on anyone who doesn't agree with them. Look at what they did to Joe Rogan, who was a Bernie supporter, Bill Maher, Dave Chappelle, and J.K. Rowling. That's exactly right, Jennifer, because these are militant, far left socialists, Marxists. And so if you, and again, the 4 goals of the woke left, and I've written about this on my Substack. If you just go to carlin.substack.com and do a search for 4 goals, it'll pop right up. The 4 goals of the woke left, which does include these people, are gain as much power as possible, destabilize the system, attack capitalism, usher in their Marxist utopia. Everything they do is to achieve one or more of those goals. And if you get in their way, like you denounce their tactics or you talk about them in a way that is less than flattering, they will perceive you to be the enemy because you're getting in their way of gaining as much power as possible, destabilize the system, attacking capitalism, ushering in their Marxist utopia. And so it doesn't matter if you're generally on the left. You are still the enemy and you must be dealt with. These people don't see you as I actually wrote about this on my Substack. I have a series called The Woke Mind. And I wrote maybe about a month ago about the fact that the woke left do not see you as a human being. They do not see you anything more than a tool that can be used to either advance their goals or an obstacle that's going to get in their way. And they're going to treat you accordingly. You do not have humanity unless you agree with them. That's it.
and brave to be your martial force.
Mhm.
And you would recruit people. who
Yes,
were
exactly. They view you
militant
as a
to be
body.
marshals.
Sure.
Exactly,
And they
Sin.
would protect the group against attacks from the right, but also sometimes attacks from Maoists. The Maoists would try to seize the stage or
Okay.
something like that. So, and there was a lot of tragedies. You had the group that was militant communists who
Mhm.
left New York, where they had a kind of reputation of mixing it up, not with fascists, but with liberals and other progressives. And they went to North Carolina and they were marching with slogans like "Death to the Klan." Well, the Klan said no death to you and killed like.
Right. Greensboro. Sure.
So it was not a successful tactic to try that. And in fact, some people were victimized.
Okay.
So I'd like to compliment people who are brave enough to be able to mix it up, but I would
Mhm.
suggest always
Understood.
do it with a defensive formulation.
Understood.
Don't talk about free speech at all.
Mhm.
Just be there when
The author's
people
like,
need to be
"Shut up.
defended."
Okay.
Shut up.
And
Shut up.
the other
Stop
thing is
talking. My
that
turn to
they
talk now. He's
you
getting so
always
annoyed.
are going to be infiltrated.
Mhm.
The person who's talking about throwing, Molotov cocktails, or is the most radical person in your group, 1 of 5 of you is probably a police provocateur.
Okay.
This is a tactic that has hundreds of years.
Indeed.
Police,
Indeed.
tactics.
Okay.
Going back to the Russian.
Right. So 3 things there to address. The first is the kind of post-war militancy, which you're entirely right to sort of mark the continuity, that I think that there's something to be said for a kind of shift in the global north, or at least the not the Eastern Bloc's different conversation, but about a kind of street militancy that existed with a certain leeway for militancy that you can see with the Days of Rage, that you can see with May 68, and that the militant anti-fascist tradition is part of this and grows out of this, is a part of the same conversation. All sorts of examples. Another thing to comment on is certainly you're right that when you organize against the far right, there is a good chance they're going to attack you. They do that.
That's projection.
And we can there's all sorts of ways to respond to that. But I think that certainly being ready for self-defense is important. I think you're right about that. But I'm not convinced that the media always recognizes the difference between offense and defense. Right. So even in the scenario you're talking about, right, they were going to portray the scenario you're talking about as clashes at best or aggression at worst. So I think that...
Is he going to argue that when Antifa purposefully goes and, I don't know, breaks the windows of the Democratic Party headquarters the day after Joe Biden got inaugurated? Where was that? Was that Portland or Seattle? It was somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. Antifa went and just proactively broke all the windows in the Democrat Party headquarters. Antifa was shooting off fireworks at, I'm pretty sure it was in Portland. They were shooting off fireworks at the mayor of Portland's apartment complex to try to start it on fire. Like, you're telling me that's defensive? Okay. Or yes, exactly. They proactively attacked Andy No and tried to kill him on like several occasions. Yeah, that's not defensive, bro. The military trains troops to see the enemy as a body or a bad guy. Listen to any combat vet talking about killing an enemy. They have to dehumanize them. Well, yeah, but we're not talking about people in the military. We're talking about normal people. When I say the woke left, I don't even just mean Antifa. I mean everyone who is voting for this far right bullshit. That could include Antifa, who are fundamentally militaristic, but not necessarily. It also could just include your average kindergarten teacher, who are not going to be showing up in black bloc, right? And so your average kindergarten teacher doesn't view you as human either. This isn't a trained military, but it's not though. It's not. Antifa is their military. I am talking about a broader perspective about people who buy in to the woke left ideology. That could be your average kindergarten teacher. It could be your average social worker. It could be pretty much anyone who is registered as a Democrat. Oh, did I say far right? If I said far right when I meant far left, I apologize. But those people are not militaristic. Those people are not getting involved in black bloc. Those people are not going to protest. But that doesn't mean they view you as human. They do not view you as human.
The strategies and tactics are sometimes discussed as if people involved can kind of take a...
Well, and Jennifer is illustrating the point. Jennifer said, I asked an Antifa person about Andy No, and the person said Andy got what he deserved because he spreads disinformation and misinformation. So it's not that Andy No is out there attacking anyone, because Andy No would never do that. Andy No said words that Antifa didn't like. Even worse than that, Andy No exposed who Antifa is. Andy No showed everyone who they really are. Andy No wrote a whole book about them. So he wrote and said words that they didn't like, and they tried to kill him for it on multiple occasions.
Step back, think it over, and then decide how they're going to be covered. And that's not the case, right? So I think that any questions about offense and defense need to take that into account. Do they like to get punched in the face? Well, I mean, some of them do, right? I mean, or at least some of them claim to like it. I've heard plenty of stories, though. I mean, to some extent, fascism back then and fascism today is predicated on an alleged virility, masculinity, power, prowess, domination. And a lot of the main recruiters in these groups get impressionable young people, especially men, to join them because they can project that power. Based on some of the interviews I've done, some anti-fascists have claimed that one way to drain them of that recruiting power is to physically humiliate them by making it so that they are overwhelmed and therefore unable to project that kind of power. So I think that certainly there is a political value in successfully physically defeating fascists, even if they claim to like it. And some of them maybe do. I mean, not the most savory group of people. So I wouldn't necessarily say that physical confrontation is counterproductive. And even if they like it, if you win, then that can be helpful as well. As far as the infiltrator thing, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of infiltrators now and in the past. They're all over. It's hard to avoid that, although some groups avoid it simply by not bringing in new members, which is one way to do it. But I think also there's another side of it, which is the snitch jacketing side, which is assuming that someone who is proposing something militant is necessarily an informant, which isn't always true. It's tough to figure out what's going on. I have no great wisdom to impart about that, but I think there's two sides to the conversation. There was in the back. Yeah, okay, let's go with you. Sure.
I want to go back to the ARA.
Please do. Yes.
And they include reproductive
Uh-huh.
rights. And I'm wondering, and you were talking to people, it feels like that's dropped out.
Okay.
And just if that came up in conversations or in your interviews, or like if you have ideas of how that dropped out and how it's coming back, if it's coming back, is it?
Sure.
National certainly haven't dropped it.
So, I mean, first to sort of explain the kind of organizational lineage is that the Anti-Racist Action Network declined into the late 2000s and sort of gave way to what's now the Torch Network, which is sort of the successor of that. And I believe that the points of unity are rather similar. If there's anyone here who knows that slightly, but I think they're rather similar. I think that they include the sort of clause about being opposed to domination in all its forms, but I don't know how much organizing is being done specifically around that issue. I just don't know. But I do know that there is a flexible interpretation and a focus on feminist and gender issues that a lot of groups have, but and
Do you find it at all telling that they haven't mentioned trans issues or queer issues at all in this? Remember, this was 5 years ago. This is back when they were still in the white supremacy, which is really capitalism. White supremacy is the most evil thing of all time. They haven't mentioned queer once. It was a simpler time. Before, there were 87,000 genders of every variation and variety. It was a simpler time. Before, they were defending the rights of people to be deer, and zims, and zers, and z's, and zers. Ah, what a time.
University bookstore is now closed.
And there are groups doing a wide variety of organizing. For example, in Montreal, there's a Food Against Fascism, which is kind of a response to the effort by the far right to serve food to, I guess, probably just to white people, really, right? So there are different organizational responses. As far as that specifically, I'm not sure of any current initiatives. No, but with reproductive rights? Okay, can you share? Okay. The GDC, General Defense Committee of the IWW in Minneapolis has done, what have they done?
Just like reproductive, like they're, protecting abortion.
Have done that work, apparently. So there you have it. But it's good to do, and other groups should do it too. Yes. Yes.
I have a question about Dartmouth's original statement about your work, how that was revived. What kind of your experience?
What happened with that?
And how tenured faculty can support contingent faculty who
Great.
might not have a best-selling book and be on the
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Okay. So just to give the background for people who aren't familiar, and there are open seats if people want to sit down, go right ahead. So when my book came out and I started doing media, actually, the kind of the everyday Dartmouth people get an email with like, what's going on at Dartmouth? And so in the beginning, there was a thing from an interview I did in the Boston Globe, like, hey, our Mark Bray was in the news. That's cool. But after I was on Meet the Press, the trolls came out and contacted the president of the college, and Campus Reform, which is like a Breitbart for kids, reached out to the president, and he gave a comment very quickly without talking to me or talking to my department or looking into my work at all, condemning what he called, quote unquote, violent protests, taking it out of context, et cetera, et cetera. And that sort of was picked up by Breitbart and Fox News, and all the death threats came in and everything, and it became a situation. Shortly thereafter, some mainly historians or people in other departments started a letter of solidarity supporting my academic freedom, explaining actually what it is that I was saying, which was misrepresented.
Yo, this is crazy. Okay, so for those who don't know, my background is that for the first 10 years of my career, I worked in higher education. One of the colleges I worked at, circa 2007, so it would have been 10 years before this guy's talk came out, around 2007-ish, I worked at Dartmouth. I worked in the fundraising office at Dartmouth. And the reason I bring this up is that Dartmouth, when I was there, and historically speaking, is an extremely conservative school. And that's not to say it's like Hillsdale or anything, but in relation to like the rest of the Ivy League, it is extremely, extremely conservative. And there are a lot of alumni at Dartmouth that are extremely conservative and get really, really pissed off anytime anything lefty, anything happens at Dartmouth. And so it's actually, first of all, I didn't know this guy worked at Dartmouth. Secondly, it is mind-bogglingly, it is boggling my mind how much Dartmouth has changed, that a group of professors wrote a letter for this in solidarity to the president. Like, that's, now this was after I had left Dartmouth, but like, that's crazy. That tells me, and I know that I'm pretty sure there were protests when James Lindsay was going to go speak at Dartmouth. I'm pretty sure there was protests when Andy Ngo was going to go speak at Dartmouth. I could be making that up. I remember something vague like that. Anyway, if Dartmouth has really changed that much that quickly, that's mind-boggling. Because again, I worked in the development office, so I worked in the fundraising wing of Dartmouth, and there was a whole very large contingent of extremely conservative alumni who could get the college pretty much to do whatever they wanted. If they had a whole website where like what was it called? Like Dartmouth Review or something like that, where they monitored like any liberal anything having to do with the college, and the college read that website religiously, and they responded to that website like all the time. They were very well aware that the people that they were raising quite literally billions with a B, billions of dollars from, were extremely conservative. So that's crazy. I didn't realize that happened. But again, it was years after I left, so I wouldn't have known at the time.
And was signed by more than 120 Dartmouth faculty. When that happened, the president issued another statement basically being, oh, no, I was supporting his academic freedom. We're good. It's okay. So that was kind of the end of that. And it shows you, of course, the power of, well, I mean, in a basic sense, workplace solidarity. But in the specific case of the university, what happens if the faculty support you? Now, part of the backstory there is that the Dartmouth College president is unpopular, to say the least. He's done a lot of things that people have a lot of issues with. The community's not too psyched about him. The faculty's not too psyched about him. They were looking for an opportunity to be against him. They took it. But there are plenty of other left academics who are not so fortunate with the amount of support they get. And it's certainly a scary time. And the kind of irony of it is there's this debate about free speech, but really those who are trying to limit it are the right-wingers who are trying to take any reference to race or gender or popular resistance.
Wow. Okay, I'm sorry. I need to get him saying that it's really the right wing who's trying to censor speech, because that was crazy. Clipping time.
It's certainly a scary time. And the kind of irony of it is there's this debate about free speech, but really those who are trying to limit it are the right-wingers who are trying to take any reference to race or gender or popular resistance as making it, a new kind of McCarthy era. Certainly, I think workplace solidarity is important. I think also in a broader sense, I think it's worthwhile for us to not simply fall back on a kind of neutral classically liberal interpretation of free speech, but actually to put forward politics and values and say, you know what, these kinds of statements that, George Ciccarello Marr's comments about, the deadliness of white masculinity, that is a legitimate comment to make, and that this is backed by a lot of research and a lot of evidence, and that talking about anti-fascism is a legitimate political tradition, historical legacy, and it's tough, but we need to support each other. Certainly, I'm an adjunct, and so certainly the president rushed to his statement more than he probably would have if I were a tenured faculty, and that's part of the conversation as well. And really, I think for me, a lot of this points back to labor issues and the university. Yeah, thank you for that. Okay,
Got it.
Lots of hands. Well, let's go in the back here with you, and then we'll work this way.
You had mentioned
Krissa, well done. Great job.
Sure.
That sort of built this culture of anti-fascism. And one thing I've noticed being sort of in like the nerd subculture is that group has sort of gone to the fascist side.
Okay.
Are there any tactics that maybe like the punks used or people who felt like they were on the outside to sort of build up that anti-fascist feeling?
Yeah.
Do you think it would work today?
So yeah, that's a great question, because from what I've read and what I've heard, there have been efforts by the far right to infiltrate all sorts of subcultural scenes, metal, folk music, bronies, you name it. And so I think it is important for people involved in those scenes to push back. And that's the kind of conversation that I think a lot of kind of mainstream pundits are really dismissive of. But the fabric of our society are these different groups and cultures and identities and communities, and you don't let them take over any of them. There's a really neat documentary that I would recommend folks check out. The English title is The Anti-Fascists, and it's about the movements in Sweden and Greece. And it came out like 9 months ago. And they've got this interview with this Greek anti-fascist who gives his 3 theses on anti-fascism. And one of them is you don't let them solidify themselves in any kind of community. Now, how to do that? Well, I think part of it, so if you look at the Rock Against Racism, their slogan was NF, which stood for National Front, but NF equals no fun. And I think that's sort of like a foundational way of kind of thinking about it in terms of pushing back and taking whatever the values are of the community and trying to emphasize that they don't stand for those values and that they're against those values, and that, you're not cool if you are down with them. As far as any specific community, that's going to look different, but I think seeing it as a cultural struggle is part of it. Yeah, but please do kick them out of there, wherever there is. Yeah.
So you mentioned before that you can track kind of like individuals and groups over generations, like in terms of like far right or fascist recruitment. Like, is there anything new under the sun? Are there things that are unique to kind of our current historical political moment, or is it the same mechanisms in a different context like that?
Yes and no. I think some of the fundamental things have continued, but certainly, so the efforts to try to make the far right respectable are not entirely new, but not entirely old, right? So like David Duke tried to go from being the Klan leader who wore the robes to the Klan leader who wore the suit to get into office. There have been efforts earlier on. I interviewed Daryl Lamont Jenkins from One People's Project, he's someone who's been monitoring the far right for a long time.
Hang on. Jenny, what the fuck is your problem, girl? We're having a nice conversation here. Rule number 1 of my chat is don't be a dick. Don't insult me. Don't insult other people in the chat. You have managed to insult everyone in one fell swoop. What are you even doing here? Jenny, are you a conservative that doesn't understand what we're doing right now? I'm going to bet that you're a conservative that doesn't understand that we're not socialists or Antifa. Now, or alternatively, you're a far leftist who doesn't want us to hear what you guys are saying. So which is it, Jenny? Oh, Nick, why did you time her out? Now I can't question her. Hang on. I can't unhide her. Okay. Well, she can't speak up because she got timed out. Nick, don't do that when I'm questioning someone, please. Because now we can't. Okay. Jenny, if you want to wait for 5 minutes and come and answer the questions about what the fuck your problem is, you will be able to in about 5 minutes.
In his opinion, a real crucial turning point towards the kind of mainstreaming of the far right was the growth of the Minutemen around 2004. And that was a situation where the far right had an entryway into something that had kind of a mainstream connection to it around pushing back against immigration and fostering xenophobia. The notion of the alt-right is an attempt to try and put aside neo-Nazi skinheads, Klan robes, make it respectable, middle class. All these are in quotes, intellectual, et cetera, et cetera. And so certainly, right, efforts to push back against that have to try to tear off the veneer. To some extent, I think that happened after Charlottesville. It's really tragic that it took Heather Heyer's death and all that conflict for some people to be like, wait, these are just Nazis. But it kind of did take that, and I hope that it'll stick. On the other hand, though, I think it is worth recognizing that efforts to make far-right politics seem respectable make it so that the ways to fight them can sometimes be different. Certainly, I discussed that the most in chapter 3 of the book, mainly in the context of Europe, where there have been far-right parties that have grown very popular over the last few years. The Front National in France and the Party for Freedom in the Netherlands. There's all sorts of examples. To some extent, that has caused certain anti-fascist groups to shift their orientation, to dissolve, to focus on different kinds of politics, because when these parties are massive, they're in parliament, they have support from all sorts of demographics of society, you can't just push them off the streets. Which is not to say that you can't also push them off the streets, but you can't just push them off the streets. And so in that way, it requires a broader conversation and really a broader working class movement of resistance.
Hang
on. So to some extent.
Hang on. No, a lot of weirdness does not surround the Charlottesville incident. They were far-right lunatics that we should want nothing to do with, and one of them drove their car into a crowd of protesters. There will be absolutely no defense of this bullshit on my channel. I'm sorry, Jason. I'm sure you mean well and you're a regular, so I'm not saying like anything bad about you. I'm not saying I'm banning you or anything, but like people on the right have this tendency to defend really bad behavior when it comes from their side, and it is not a good look. There is no defense for Charlottesville. I'm sorry. There's none. And we can talk about not everyone there was a far-right lunatic, but there were a lot of far-right lunatics there. And to be quite frank, it was a really bad strategic blunder on the part of people who were there to protest the statues, but were not far-right lunatics. And the fact that people on the political right aligned for 2 seconds with the actual far-right lunatics and the neo-Nazis that were there, like, it wasn't a good look. It was not a good look at all. He drove his car into a crowd. I'm sorry. He was alone in the car that he drove into a crowd at full speed. There is no defense of this. No defense at all. Absolutely not. And I'm sorry, guys, optics matter. Every single time someone on the right tries to excuse what happened, he was running from Antifa. He was in a car that was driven in to a crowd of people. I've seen the evidence. Don't tell me there's no video. I've seen it. It is a really bad look. It is really ill-considered. And it is a fight that you will never, ever, 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 ever win. Nor should you. The one I saw was absolutely going full speed, backing up into a crowd of people. Absolutely.
Then some new, some old.
It's like, of all the battles you guys want to have, like I'm sorry, I'm gonna get pissed for a second. Of all the battles there are to fight, you want to be on the side of Charlottesville where the good guys? No. No. You do not drive your car into a crowd of people. I don't care what's going on. You are not the good guy if you drive your car into a crowd of people. And it is, and to be really honest, and this is the last thing I'm going to say on it, and then we should move on. If you are if the biggest problem that you have, if you are defending people who drive your car into a crowd of people, you are just being a tribalist at that point. There is no defense. You're playing politics for a political side.
Yeah. Let's go in the back. Yeah.
I read the book and enjoyed it. I was
Thank you.
disappointed in one way that there was no mention of the Blues Brothers.
Okay, sorry.
But I imagine you've met a lot of criticism of this book. One piece that I read in particular was written by Diane Johnstone. And I wondered,
Is that the counterpunch one?
Yes.
Okay.
And I wondered if maybe you'd respond to it elsewhere, but I wondered what your response to that was.
To be honest, I haven't read it. There was just so much going on at the time, and I haven't. Do you want to like pick something out of it and I can respond to it now? Sorry to disappoint. Yeah.
It was a little straw managed to
Yeah, I'm sorry, I haven't read it. I really try not to Google myself. So I don't know what's going on out there, and that's okay with me. Anyone else want to? Yeah, sure.
Have any of your family members read your book, and do you have any discussions, arguments about?
My parents are almost done with it. My mother is sweet. She says she will read any book I ever write, and I say, really, you don't have to do that. But she is reading it, and her main thing is that she's center left, but I don't come from a radical family. And so she's like, oh, I realized that like for you, liberal's a dirty word. So I was like, but I was like, Ma, you're more of a progressive or maybe a social democrat. And she's like, okay. And so that, I don't know. My parents aren't of the same politics as me, but like are supportive, and that's pretty cool. So, okay, let's go over here.
Inside of like contemporary anti-fascist struggle in the U.S., the thing that I see and encounter constantly is this concept of optics. Because I think it's a stupid word. What we mean is like we're trying to make ourselves feel important when we talk about media.
Jenny, are you far right or far left? I don't know what the hell this means. I have no idea. Are you far right or far left, Jenny? We'll wait here for a moment to see if Jenny responds, who came into my chat like a bat out of hell and insulting people. Are you far right or are you far left? I don't care to guess, Jenny. My guess is that you're either a moron or you're a far leftist, which makes you an equal amounts moron. So do you want to tell us? What exactly do you think we're doing here, Jenny? Are you capable of using your words? Are you capable of forming a coherent thought? Do you even know who you are? Or do you just go around insulting people when you don't understand what they're doing? I'm honestly curious. This has nothing to do with the stream. I just find it interesting when people come into my chat like a bat out of hell and insulting people. Are you far right or are you far left? Did I speak slowly enough for you to understand, Jenny? Let's see if Jenny's capable of forming a coherent sentence explaining why she came into my chat and started insulting all of us for no good reason. Oh, apparently she's not, which means she's going to get blocked. Goodbye, Jenny. You wasted enough of our time. Go away.
But there's a continual conversation about
How disappointing.
the
Could have been a good
necessity
talk.
of no platform
Mhm.
with the fact that no platform is terrifying.
Mm.
And the way in which that tactic and that angle is often pretty alienating to kind of the center left.
Okay.
And this constant battle back and forth of being like, is this tactic worthwhile if it's going to seem marginal, and marginalize the participants, but gets the job done in terms of no platform?
Great question.
Is
Yeah.
there a historical precedent for there being a necessity to have popular opinion upon, like behind you? I haven't found one where I can say like, yes, these fascists were beat because everyone hated them, like in the same way that the people who were actively opposing them did.
Great. So the first thing is, I think it is somewhat useful to sort of disaggregate the concept of no platform from any necessary method of enforcing it. I imagine you'd agree, right? So there are all sorts of ways to deny fascists a platform. Even the poop protest out in California, where people brought their dog's poop and laid it where the fascists were going to get set up, essentially deprived the fascists of a platform. All of the pressure that was brought to bear on like the web servers and forums that hosted the far right after Charlottesville, that's a deprival of platforms. There's all sorts of ways to do it. One of them, though, is to physically stop them from having a platform in the way that, for example, the 43 group did in the example of the Battle of Cable Street. Those are sort of physical platform denial examples. That, of course, is really what we're talking about, right? Are the examples that get that kind of popular attention. But I think it's worth thinking through, like, why is it that people loved the poop protest? Well, not everyone did, right? But it was sort of like a liberal feel-good moment. It's like, yeah, just bring your dog poop. Now, that, of course, I mean, if we're talking about the question of free speech conversations, that's no different from physically shutting them down as far as I can tell when it comes to questions of speech. So I think but that's not really where we're going with this question, right? So the broader question is
why is he
as
so
I think
afraid
you
of people to have
correctly
speech?
criticized it, the language of optics, which I think
This guy is no better than conservatives who try to censor what conversations I can and cannot engage in. What are you so afraid of with speech? Why are you afraid of people saying things that you might disagree with? If you can't form a better argument and you need to shut them up, then you're not the good guy.
think, yes, is a way to make it seem more thought out than it really. And the question of popular politics. I don't think there's any trans-historical universal connection between the two. I think there are times when, yeah, popular society will support
And by the way, it's actually really striking for me right now that when I think about censorship of speech, conservatives are actually the first thing that come to mind for me. Based on what I experience right now, based on my current lived experience, conservatives try to censor my speech way more than leftists do. And that's just reality. Leftists will block me on Twitter. Leftists will call me names. Leftists will like scream and cry every once in a while in my replies in my chat, although honestly not very much. I very rarely even hear from leftists. And I literally wrote a book about fighting back against the woke left. But do you know who I hear from all the time who try to shut me up? Conservatives. Do you know who tried to deplatform me? Conservatives. Do you know who have been successful at deplatforming me? Conservatives. Do you know who have tried to smear me in the media to get me to shut up when I say something they don't like? Conservatives. I think it's really striking that for me, and I understand and I do acknowledge that this is not the same for everyone because everyone has different experiences. But over the last 3 years, I have experienced censorship far more from conservatives than I have from the left.
Militant anti-fascist tactics. There are times when they won't.
I am not a left-leaning libertarian at all. I am an extremely far right-leaning libertarian. If you look at my political compass, I am very far right libertarian. Extremely far right. So no, you are incorrect. And congratulations, you can't even spell my name correctly.
I spoke to one anti-fascist from Barcelona who said something interesting, and this does not apply to how all anti-fascists think of it, but I think it's a useful point of departure for this issue. Is he said, and I was a little surprised at first to hear, he said, I don't care if people hate anti-fascists, because when we do what we do and it works, that's fine. People can hate anti-fascists because when I take off my mask, I'm a union organizer. The people that I organize with love me. My community loves me. I build over here and I destroy over here, essentially. And so for him, he was emphasizing that not all politics need to be done in the same container. And if you get the job done and you destroy fascism, then you can sort of like leave all the baggage of that over there and do work elsewhere. Now, that is one way of looking at it. That is neither right nor wrong. It's a contextual, it's how you look at it. But another way of looking at it, I think, is to really try to make the argument, right? People, I think, sometimes assume that popular perspectives are fixed, but they're not. And so even if you look at an example of a kind of going in the other direction would be the Netherlands. From what I've been told, people in the 90s where maybe if they didn't necessarily love what anti-fascists did, they had enough of a recent memory of the Holocaust and World War II to say, okay, if you're punching a Nazi, he is a Nazi, fine. But apparently this shifted after the murder of Pim Fortuyn, who was this like demagogue radio personality who was killed by some kind of an animal rights activist. And that shifted popular perspective about questions of no platforming and speech and violence. It can also shift in the other direction. I think that there have been important shifts even over the last 6 months after Charlottesville, that this has been debated in the public, that there are perspectives about shutting these people down that are more sympathetic or taken more seriously. I think that reasonable people can disagree about how to shut down fascists, but the argument for stopping them, for no platforming them, is something that I think we just need to push, even if it's difficult. I also think that we can think about groups can be different, but they can still coexist under a movement umbrella. And so the fact of the matter is there are going to be anti-fascist groups that do more militant actions that mainstream society is not going to be as psyched about. There'll also be more outward-facing public formations that fight against fascism. There'll be everyday people in communities that go out to demonstrations and do what they do. This is all going to happen no matter what any of us says. So how can we think of coexisting? That's, I think, sort of one of the takeaways of this. But yeah, part of it depends on your goals. Some forms of organizing depend on getting popular support, others don't. And I think they can coexist and complement each other. One example would be in Spain and France, where there are, as of the last few years, these anti-fascist neighborhood assemblies. And so one of the examples would be in Madrid, where some of the 15M assemblies, that would be the Spanish, well, the Occupy was our version of their 15M. So some of these neighborhood assemblies became anti-fascist neighborhood assemblies as the Hogar Social, which is one of their fascist groups modeled on Casa Pound in Italy and others, started to give away free food only to ethnic Spaniards, organize eviction defense, but only for people who are getting evicted who are ethnic Spaniards and so forth. So one of their neighborhood assemblies became an anti-fascist neighborhood assembly. A lot of the people who did this organizing also have their affinity groups, also participate in militant activities, but also participate in these neighborhood affinity groups. And so there's ways that you can kind of have your foot in both worlds, have them complement each other. I don't think it's all necessarily so black and white. So thank you for that question. Yes.
Yeah. So I've done a lot of organizing, like counter protests, stuff like that. And I worked with people who originally started with the Occupy movement.
And it seems like they applied some of these strategies and tactics they learned from that into, say, like counter-protesting, a Trump rally where there were neo-Nazis.
Okay.
Trying to sit at no platform or drown.
Not today.
Um,
Not today. Today, the right is deplatforming and censoring far more people than the left is. Again, the left complain, the left will whine, but the left will mostly, unless you are like really, really, really visible, the left will mostly leave you alone. There are exceptions to that, but for average people, the left will mostly leave you alone and block you and ignore you. The right will try to deplatform you. They will censor you. They will smear you. Don't tell me I don't know what I'm talking about here, bro.
I was curious, and from what I understand about Occupy, it's generally an autonomous anti-capitalist stance. So do you see a connection between what happened with Occupy and how anti-fascism in the United States is growing?
Sure.
Can you talk about that a little bit, maybe?
Sure. Right. Well, I mean, certainly the
Well, 95% of my content is fully monetized and available. And I literally talk about how to fight back against these people. So I'm sorry, you're wrong. And do you know the people that get my content pulled down? They're not on the left, they're on the right. So what you're doing right now, and you sent me some super chats today. I don't recognize you, so you might be new, and I do appreciate the super chats and I appreciate the support, but I'm going to tell you what's happening right now. You're listening to talking points that are coming from your influencers that are not necessarily grounded in reality because they are pushing a political agenda. If censorship was really so bad coming from the left, then why hasn't anything been done about it by Republicans? Do you want to know why? I know you're trying to understand, which is why I'm explaining. And again, I really don't mean any offense, but do you want to know why Republicans do absolutely nothing about the alleged tech censorship problem? Because they want to be able to use it. They want to be able to use it against their enemies. Otherwise, we had a hearing a couple weeks ago, but that was about it. Nothing's going to be done from it. They use it as a talking point to rile up their audiences. The influencers use it as a talking point to rile up their audiences. But at the end of the day, how many weeks was Eliza Blue being canceled by the right? It was at least 3 weeks. At least 3 straight weeks of that woman having to deal with that bullshit. It's sad, but it's true.
politics of any given occupier was dependent on that occupier and ranged the whole spectrum. I wrote a book called Translating Anarchy, just about New York, which I argued was fairly anarchist, relatively speaking. But as far as the sort of larger conversation, I think there is something to be said about this decade of resistance and the kinds of direct action, horizontal influences that have come from all sorts of directions. So in the book, I quote I forgot his name. There was a writer in the New Yorker who wrote pejoratively about what he called the shut it down left. But I think that's a great name and one that we should embrace. And that comes from all sorts of directions. It comes from Black Lives Matter. It comes from the immigrant rights movement. It comes from movements for queer and trans liberation, movements for feminism, Occupy. There's all sorts of examples, and anti-fascism being one of them, of using direct action from the ground up to resist. And so Occupy is certainly an early kind of example of that. You can even look earlier to the sort of the Madison State House occupation. But yeah, there's this sort of growth of this kind of politics that to some extent can be applied to all sorts of different circumstances. And that's, I think, really heartening. I think Occupy played a role in that. In part also because I think, at least in my perspective, I don't know what folks who are involved out here would think, but it seemed like to a large extent prior to Occupy, the notion of protest was still a little bit outside of the mainstream. It was associated with hippies in the 60s and was kind of passe, but no one says that anymore. And Occupy was one part of that. But yeah, and some of the people I interviewed for the book were active in Occupy or active in Antifa groups today. which is partly what the media missed. The media always assume that everything is just in its own box, that Antifa is this, Occupy is this. But of course, people do all sorts of stuff, and these influences go in all sorts of directions. Let's go back there.
So I just wanted to say thanks for coming to Seattle, and thank you for writing this amazing book.
Thank you.
And not doing the typical historian as your intro, kind of led into, waiting years and years to research. I am a current Bellevue College student, and Bellevue College has been rife with white supremacy, and we had a rash of flyering that has gone on, and we've seen administration do absolutely nothing, pretty much just, throw up their diversity campaign and thought that was, welcoming the neo-Nazis was the way to go, right? Just ridiculous. So I want to thank you because the information that you're providing and the deeply rooted white supremacy issues we have in the Northwest are very serious. So I think that this is the time to kind of look at work like yours and everything you've compiled. The media in it is fucking awesome. All your references, everything are
Thank you.
solid. So it's like, this is the time for that. So I just want to say thanks.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, just to briefly comment, universities cannot accept white supremacists and fascists or accept the notion that that's just sort of another opinion. Just non-negotiable.
It kind of seems like this guy became, I think Sin says he's an assistant professor at Rutgers now. So it kind of seems like this guy just became a historian and to basically write books about like being an activist. Like, I mean, my God, can you imagine going through all the trouble to become a historian just so you can write books with a skewed far left viewpoint? Gosh, university, like, and I'm still wondering how, like, is there anyone on the conservative, on the political right, not even the conservative right, but the political right, that this guy wouldn't consider to be a fascist?
Pushable. Yeah. Yes.
What do you think of the Department of Homeland Security?
I'm against it. As a terrorist organization. Yeah.
What are the implications?
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Organizing with that.
Right. And also the conversations about gang labels, which someone the other day told me that was sort of in the air about anti-racist action in the 90s too, in terms of the kind of gang label being applied. Well, obviously the broader context is very disturbing, right? There's the Black identity extremist label. There's the shift of the Trump administration away from moving a lot of its resources away from investigating.
Hey, listen, was it under Trump? Yeah, it was under Trump. It was under Trump that freaking juggalos for the Insane Clown Posse got labeled a terrorist organization. I'm sorry, what? So I agree with him on this point.
Terrorism from white supremacists, figures like Sebastian Gorka and others in the White House arguing that basically terrorism is synonymous with being a Muslim.
Fucking Sebastian
so there's a
Gorka.
broader conversation there. Certainly.
Do you guys want to hear my funny Sebastian Gorka story? I know some people here have heard it, but I don't know that everyone's heard it. Okay, here's my funny Sebastian Gorka story. I had never met Sebastian Gorka. I had never had a conversation with Sebastian Gorka. And then one day, I retweeted something that Sebastian Gorka said about AOC. And Sebastian Gorka was straight wrong. And I don't remember exactly what it was, to be honest, because it was like 2 years ago. But he was straight wrong in what he said. And I called him out and I told him he was wrong because he was fucking wrong. And Sebastian Gorka direct messaged me his cell phone number. And he basically, he literally just put in a DM. And again, I had never spoken to this man before. He put his cell phone number in a direct message to me and he just said, call me. And so I was like, what the fuck is this? And so I kind of thought about it. I was like, should I call is Sebastian Gorka really mad over a tweet? And so I called him and I said, you DM'd me your cell phone number? And he started to lay into me, like actually screaming in his, I can't do his voice anymore. I used to be able to do his voice. Like in his freaking accent, he started screaming at me over a tweet. And the funniest part of it was, and again, I don't remember exactly what the tweet said, but I do remember that Sebastian Gorka did not actually read what I wrote because he completely misquoted me as he was yelling at me over a fucking tweet. And so I started laughing because I was like, I had just woken up from a nap. Sebastian Gorka had DM'd me his phone number telling me to call him so he could yell at me. He didn't even read what I had actually tweeted. And he was laying into me, this person I had never spoken to before. And I was like, what the fuck is even going on right now? And I just started laughing. And he really, let me tell you what, he really did not like that I was laughing. And I basically told him to fuck off. And I was gonna say whatever I wanted to say, and there wasn't really anything he could do about it. And he could have all the feelings he wants about my Twitter. But I was like, you are upset over a tweet. And anyway, he hung up on me when I laughed at him. But I swear to God, that is a true story. I should have recorded it. I did not have the presence of mind to record it because I was like, the Sebastian Gorka, like, he always seemed like kind of like a reasonable person. No, not a reasonable person at all. Got super pissed over a tweet.
It's not entirely dissimilar from how the state has tried to tar really anyone it's concerned with, environmentalists, anarchists, to some extent even elements in Occupy. And I mean, to get mildly meta, I mean, that's sort of embedded in the notion of terrorism itself is a way to demonize non-state violence. And so I think it's a category that always needs to be really interrogated at the very least. But what to do about it? I mean, I think part of it, one, is to just push back and say, okay, agree or disagree with anti-fascist terrorism is not a legitimate label for this. And I mean, it's not even an organization, let alone a terrorist organization, but that's, and so part of it is to push back, to stand in solidarity with each other, to organize in support of the J20 defendants, for example, the people who were arrested at the inauguration protests in DC and are charged with 70 and 80 years in jail for ridiculous non-reasons.
Wait, are we in favor of like, or excuse me, are we against people getting arrested when they protest at Capitol buildings now? Is that, are we hearing that in the days of yore, pre-January 6th, that the person who wrote the Antifa handbook is in favor of people protesting at the Capitol without getting arrested? Wow. We've made some progress since then, haven't we?
So there's an example where, to a large extent, the quote-unquote Trump resistance has ignored these people. But even if you disagree with some of the politics that some of them have, standing in solidarity is a way to push back against the efforts to label any one of us terrorists or anything else. So, yeah, it's a concern, but not entirely a new concern, and one that will persist in a different form, whatever the next movement is or the next issue is. So, sure.
This is probably not a single answer question, but
It's okay.
in case it is, what do you think is the biggest threat to anti-fascism organizing in the United States today?
There you go. The state. All right, next. No. Well, no, I mean, obviously that is the purveyor of violence that is most relevant to the conversation. And really, what's interesting about this is, we talk about fascism and anti-fascism, but as the three-way fight blog points out, is a three-way fight with the third part being the state, especially for anti-fascists who have anti-state politics. And a lot of times, even in the Battle of Cable Street, right, the battle was really between anti-fascists and the police. So it brings into the question the role of the police and the state in this. Militant anti-fascists are very critical of both. And so, yeah, that's basically going back to the terrorism question. That's really the dynamic going on here, and can also be kind of segued into the, like, okay, you can talk about American Vanguard or Richard Spencer like fascists, but you can also talk about the influences of fascism on all sorts of politics, and think of it not just as a specific defined entity, but as a kind of influence that weaves its way into all sorts of things. I interviewed some anti-fascists from a group in Bordeaux in France called Pavé Brûlant, or burning pavement. And they organize against the far right where they live. They have a campaign going on against some identitarians who are doing an anti-halal campaign under the guise of being pro-animal rights, which is, well, but that's an example, right? That also some of the far right will do Islamophobic campaigns under the guise of being pro-LGBTQ. There's all these examples of trying to take things that are of the left and use it, right? White supremacists have also done that against kosher food in the same way. So they do this organizing against the explicit far-right groups, but they also claim that from their perspective, all political parties in France are to some extent fascistic, as they saw it. And that's especially, I think, important way of looking at it in a country that has so much Islamophobia, even on the left, right? So that's another way of looking at it too, which I think has to be part of the conversation as well, is not just what are these small groups doing, but how do their ideas influence all sorts of conversations and discourses and policies. And then in that sense, we're talking about the state, we're talking about capitalism. And that's kind of the payoff to this is to some extent, you know, the discourse gets so bogged down in these specific anti-fascists, these specific fascists, but really that's sort of an entryway into talking about the bigger picture. So, yeah.
You mentioned particular, like the role of Islamophobia in far-right organizing, and I was wondering if your book touches on, if you have any comments on Antifa associations with fighting against ISIS. Is that, I have, like, you know, has that in any ways, like, is that complicated that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's possible, but I don't know of anyone who considers fighting ISIS to be Islamophobic. I think that people of good faith realize that that's not what Islam's about, right? But to just sort of elaborate on the background, certainly perhaps the most dramatic, explicitly anti-fascist struggle going on right now is in the context of the Rojava Revolution, where people from the region and people from around the world have journeyed to help the egalitarian socialist revolution underway in Kurdistan fight back against the Turkish state, against ISIS, against all sorts of enemies on all sides. Some of those folks I know from Occupy Wall Street in New York. One of the folks I know, unfortunately, died in the struggle. Far too many have died in the struggle. But I interviewed some of those folks for the book, and they emphasized that the people involved in the struggle, no matter where they're from, essentially see this as an anti-fascist struggle. There's a lot of anti-fascist imagery. There's all sorts of photos of, you know, German and other anti-fascist flags being hung. And some of the groups have names that are harken back to the Spanish Revolution. So, I mean, certainly that's a dynamic in anti-fascism that is completely ignored by the media. And is, I think, an important counterpoint to the argument that anti-fascist politics can always be nonviolent. I don't know what the nonviolent way out of fighting ISIS is, or fighting Hitler would have been. So I think that's an important, that can't be ignored. So people who don't know about that should read about it. All right, I'm going to take you in the back, but I'm going to check in with Grace on how we're doing on time.
Got about 10 more minutes of this, guys.
Well,
The store's closed.
yeah. All right. So I'm going to take the question in the back, and then who else wants to get in before we move to book signing, saying goodnight, moving on. All right. So let's do 1, 2, and then we'll wrap it up. So go ahead in the back.
So I have kind of a twofold question. Part of it related
Shoot.
to the optics of the question.
Yeah.
But there's been a lot of talk and TED Talks and people discussing sort of engaging the other since like the election.
Okay. Right.
Sort of a matter of survival for many of us, with
Hmm.
friends and family. But
They're
also
going to literally die.
trying in popular politics or such to keep people on the right side at least and getting works and things like that. So I'm wondering your idea on engaging the other, and particularly
Yeah.
as it relates to like more at-risk or marginal
Hmm.
viewpoints that aren't necessarily so much hate, where they're on board with like, you know, taking down people in a bigoted way. And
Oh, shit. Breaking news. Breaking news. John Cardillo has just tweeted out that he's being told that John Fetterman is basically brain dead and it's being hidden because they're keeping him in office until August 18th, avoids a special election, which Republicans would most certainly win. Holy shit. Holy shit. That's crazy. Here, let me show you real quick. And guys, we do have about 10 minutes of this Q&A left, and we are going to watch it. But this is like a big deal. Look at this. John Fetterman is essentially brain dead, and it's being hidden because keeping him in office until August 18th avoids a special election. Fucking A, man. What the hell? That's a big deal. Who could possibly have seen that coming? Who could possibly and listen, okay, so as much of a useless lump of nothing that I always believed John Fetterman was, like, it is sad. It's sad. It is. What has happened to him is sad. It is not good for people to have strokes. It is not good for people to become brain dead a month after they get sworn into Senate. It's not good, and we should not revel in people being sick and all of that stuff. But holy hell.
Mannered so much as people who might get there. So trying to be more sort of inclusive, I guess, and wherever, and that line is so muddy, it's difficult. But and then also kind of related, this is sort of a politics 101 comment, I think, but
Sure.
you know how we're in this political spectrum, kind of the fascist and like the Mussolini and Hitler sort of extremes, how they kind of come around because the political spectrum is a circle in the end. As that goes, are the extremes? There's this idea, and again, it's not.
I've heard of it. Yeah.
I think the super bigoted extreme.
Yeah.
Would get there, but the people more on the edge of getting to the extreme. But there's this idea that people need to express in a First Amendment sort of way their whatever type of viewpoint, even bigoted, in order to not have a repressed group that then revolts and creates violence. So I'm curious too about your thoughts on how that is, of course, the Democratic right, and where's the line, and where does it get too horrible, and what do we do to keep getting bigger, and that sort of
Okay. Yeah. All right. A few things there. So in terms of the first part of your question, I have a section in the book based on an article I wrote for Roar Magazine about everyday anti-fascism, which are some thoughts that I threw out there about trying to push back against efforts by the alt-right and related folks to make racism great again, make sexism great again. And it's a focus on how ultimately we can't ignore the kind of meta question of what society thinks about these kinds of things, because even explicitly militant anti-fascist organizing, doxing only works if people think it's bad to be a Nazi, for example. And so there is kind of a back and forth on that. I always think.
Did he just advocate for doxing? Doxing only works if people think it's bad to be a Nazi? Well, no, doxing is pretty inconvenient, even if people don't think even doxing is inconvenient. What the hell? Wow.
Think of a debate that emerged in the German communist movement in the early 30s around the slogan, which I can't remember the exact slogan, but it was something to the effect of smash a Nazi wherever you see him. Something like that, right?
Nazis are small.
Okay, so there you go. And there, so on the one hand is, okay, whenever you see someone who's affiliated with a Nazi party, confront them. The other argument is, no, we need to win them over. And well, I mean, I think there's something to both of them, right? I mean, because you do want to win people over who are on the fence. Fascism grows when people who are susceptible to it see the right as being better able to meet their needs than the left, right? So there is a popular politics component to it, but there is also a confrontation component to it. I don't think that either is inherently right as contextual, and to some extent you want to do both, I guess, right? Somehow. But in the context of the kind of Trump moment, I was really alarmed at the response of a lot of like white intellectuals to Trump's victory, which was to try and find every way possible to focus on sympathizing with racist people who supported Trump and putting that kind of consideration over the consideration of the people who are going to suffer and who are suffering. Right. So I think that certainly,
Who suffered under Trump.
We need to build movements that can organize those who have been only the subject of the disdain of the liberal establishment. That involves organizing in rural areas, for example. Groups like Redneck Revolt have focused on that in interesting ways. But on the other hand, also recognize that at a certain point, if people choose to take substantive actions to promote white supremacist policies, then they are putting themselves in an antagonistic position with people who are suffering, and resistance is legitimate. So, I think it's a delicate balance, and there is no right or wrong to it. It's a matter of
this effing guy. This is why we always watch the Q&A, by the way. The Q&A is always and universally the best part, because the Q&A is when they have to improv, and when they improv, they say the quiet part out loud. This guy is giving very, very, very intellectual answers for why it's okay to dox people, for why it's okay to target people who go against their political agenda, which in this case is revolting against capitalism and has nothing to do with racism or the color of your skin or any of that. It's all about capitalism. This guy is advocating for, he's basically saying speech is violence. And this is a college professor. These are the people that I really worry about, to be honest. Like, Antifa's annoying, but most of the people who are in, like, Black Bloc are unhinged, retarded lunatics. That are, and when I say unhinged, I actually mean they're seriously mentally ill. And that's why they gravitate to that sort of thing. But this guy is a college professor that speaks very reasonably until he, legitimizes doxing as a political strategy. And he does it in such like an even-keeled way that you're kind of taken off balance by the fact that he does it. This is who we need to be worried about.
Context, but I think both need to be taken into account. Now, the extremism question, I disagree with the extremism paradigm. I think that the notion that at the far left and far right they become the same isn't correct, in my opinion, in part because it's a paradigm that grows out of the assumption that what we think of as the center is the center of politics. So it normalizes your kind of centrist, classically liberal perspectives, and by portraying everything that's outside of it as an extreme, it normalizes the center. I always like to think of the example of the politics of the early Soviet Union. When there was a right deviation, there was a left deviation, there were those in the center. So even in the context of politics that most Americans would find extremist, there was a spectrum. If you read literature on Spanish anarchism, a lot of historians talk about the anarcho-syndicalists as like the moderates of the anarchists. But everyone always wants to make an extremes out of, so all is to say, I'm not a fan of the spectrum model of politics. Certainly anti-fascists and fascists are generally illiberal insofar as they are not of the center, but apart from that, differ in everything else. So I don't think that's a useful paradigm. It also relates to sort of a Cold War tendency to try to equate the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany through the paradigm of totalitarianism as a way to justify the Cold War struggle. It's, very historically contextualized framework. I don't remember any. Does that pretty much cover most of the things that?
I guess just I sort of relating two topics in one. The other piece of that one was if there's not a voice made available to folks.
Yeah. Okay, right. Yeah, I knew there was something else there. I couldn't remember it. So the argument that if you shut down fascists, they will be frustrated and therefore more dangerous to grow. Well, we can look at how fascist and far-right movements grow. There have been, unfortunately, plenty of them. How they grow is well documented. You can read any of these histories or current events about how Cost a Pound or Golden Dawn grow. I don't know of any examples of simply being shut down, therefore leading to them growing. The ways that they grow are pretty self-evident. They embed themselves in communities. They meet people's needs. The Golden Dawn will give out free food to ethnic Greeks in the context of a economic downturn. People like that. The welfare state's fallen apart. They'll turn to that. They play into sort of xenophobic and racist societal perspectives. They embed themselves in football culture, in martial arts culture. So fascism succeeds when it makes its perspectives about race or about nation or about gender or about sexuality seem natural and eternal and gets people to believe that. The key is to not let any of that seem natural or eternal, because none of it is. So to me, understanding the politics of how they grow should dictate strategies for stopping that. And so you can key in on all these different dynamics and look at the way that the tiki torch wielding Nazis dressed in khakis because they wanted college students to see them, or white college students to see themselves in that. So could that happen? Yeah, it could happen. It is happening. And so the way to some extent to make it not happen is to be like, if you step on that side of this, your life is going to become hell. One way or another. We're going to tell your parents. We're going to tell your community. We're going to, I mean, that's what happened. A lot of these folks came home to lose their jobs, to find themselves as pariahs, and say, oh, I didn't know what I was doing. Well, if you step on that side of this and you start waving that torch, you've made a decision and you're going to have to pay for it. And, to me, that's, I think, the kind of actual tangible reality of what this amounts to. Did you want to jump in? Oh, because you looked like, all right, well, we're going to go to the last question over here.
See, I feel conflicted. Because I personally have absolutely no problem with if one of those tiki torch yielding mother effers from that particular rally worked for an organization that I was running, which would never happen because I work by myself and I will always work by myself because I don't want to be responsible for a team of people. That's another story for another day. But let's just live in the land of fantasy for a second. If I ran an organization and I found out that one of those tiki torch wielding mother effers that were marching around saying, what is it, like, you will not replace us, worked for me, they would not have a job for very long. And I absolutely mean that. And I'm talking about that specific group. That very, 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 very specific group. Now, there were other people in the general Charlottesville area who didn't want the statues taken down, but not because they were a part of that group, but because they were, digging in their heels about history and doing general conservative bullshit. And it's, this is where conservatives make really dumb, boneheaded decisions about aligning with people who are not good people, and they actually expect that that's not going to have any repercussion. And they don't think it should have a repercussion. And I'm like, bro, you might actually have a point about the statues. You might. However, when you're making that point alongside people who are wielding torches led by Richard Spencer saying Jews will not replace us, those are not good optics. And that is not going to be beneficial to the point that you're making. But they don't listen. And they go, you're trying to censor me. And then they whine and they whine and they whine some more. And then they end up aligning with, and they say, you're calling me a white supremacist. And I say, well, bro, you're you're marching alongside neo-Nazis here. Like, what do you want me to think? And so I have mixed feelings because I legitimately think that there is a large portion of the political right that would legitimately get roped into doing something that is optically really bad, that is stupid, that is ill-considered, where they align themselves with some of the most toxic people on the planet. And I don't necessarily think those people should lose their job over that. I don't. But am I firing the actual neo-Nazi? You bet your fucking ass I am. So I really do have mixed feelings about this. I do. And in general, what I think, and this is from a highly practical perspective, don't align yourself with really bad people. And if you think that this is an abstract argument, it's not. Because Tucker Carlson has had these people on his show. That's stupid. You shouldn't do that. Don't align with really bad people. I have seen influencers on the right use the same talking points as these people. That's stupid. Don't do that. You are aligning with really bad people. And every single time you align with extremists on the right, you are hurting your own argument and you are hurting everyone else that's trying to fight for you because you are making a bad, boneheaded decision in order to troll people. And you're giving people like this all the ammo that they need. Well, I, again, do consider people who are marching down the street with torches, chanting, "Jews will not replace us." Those are extremists, Dragonwater. I'm sorry. Those are extremists. Anyone who is using the word Jew as an insult is an extremist. Anyone who is talking about a white well-being movement or a white positivity movement or white erasure or white genocide, those are extremists. Anyone who is ranting and raving about white people being the poor victims of society, those are extremists. And it does not serve anyone to align with any of those people. And I think we can apply some common sense to this and know that all of that is true.
Here, and then I can write my name in your book if you want. Yes.
First, thank you for coming to Seattle.
Thank you.
I had a comment on an earlier observation of yours and a question as well. You referred to the Barcelona labor leader in his compartmentalizations of, say, civil support and direct action. And when you stated that, I was just thinking that's very analogous to the situation of the soldier.
Exactly, everyday therapist. I agree with this.
In perpetuating violence and law, and then returning to civil life.
Well, am I understanding you correctly that basically this is a critique of violence? I'm not really sure what
that compartmentalization of being a civic, a member of civil society, and then having, direct
the difference, right?
Historically, you see that the soldier who goes off to fight for the state will then return to civil society and have those.
I understand. I think the differences are, one, that part of the point he was making was that people don't know that he's both, or at least most people don't know. And so in that way, it compartmentalizes in the way that people, soldiers, know that. And the other thing is, like, it's not a this and that, but sort of a, well, what's going on this month? Well, there's a strike this month, but there's a far right demonstration next month, and it's more of a kind of fluid situation. And also, I think that a lot of the anti-fascists I spoke to, especially those who are involved in the labor movement, see anti-fascism as a labor struggle, and for them, it's not necessarily so black and white. But thank you for that. Okay, so I'm going to wrap it up there, and thank you for coming out. Thank you, Grace. Thank you to the bookshop. Have a good night.
All right, guys. Well, you made it to the end of another Socialism Saturday. I hope you enjoyed it. I thought it was really insightful. You know, with a lot of Socialism Saturdays, we're watching the extremists, and they use very different language than that guy. And I think what was very striking to me about this Socialism Saturday is this guy was speaking in completely normal language. He looked like a normal human being. He doesn't talk like most of the socialists we listen to on Socialism Saturday. He looks completely respectable. Most socialists look crazy. But he was saying the same things that the socialists were saying. He was just saying it in much more compelling language that the average person, and dare I say, the average college student, might be confused by. So I think that people like him are pretty dangerous, and I think it was good for us to hear that he believes every single thing that the normal socialists we watch on Socialism Saturday believe. He told us that. He wants to overthrow capitalism. He believes in doxing. He believes in deplatforming. He believes violence is acceptable when you say something that he doesn't like. He believes all these things. I mean, I'm pretty sure he was an anarchist, which I'm pretty much an anarchist too, but I'm not a far left anarchist. And that's terrifying. That's like, people like that are way more terrifying than like your average like black bloc person. And so be aware with those people. And this is why it is so important to understand that whiteness, white supremacy, anti-racism has nothing to do with skin color. It doesn't have anything to do with looking like me. It all has to do with capitalism. They are all anti-capitalist. They use race interchangeably with capitalism in order to rile people up. They do the same thing with queer stuff, by the way. And so it's really important for you to understand this so that when you hear people like we just watched tonight in the real world, when you hear them talking about their ideas, you can be able to pick out like, oh, no, he doesn't really mean that. He means this over here. And this is important because these people do show up in the real world. And I want you guys to be able to identify it when it's coming out of context, because that's when you can fight back against it. All right. Well, guys, that rounds it out for this week. Now, I just want to remind everyone, please make sure you are subscribed to my Substack, Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. And did I write anything on the right censoring more than the left? In fact, I have. I have written several times on my Substack about the right censoring more than the left. So make sure you're subscribed to my Substack. You can subscribe for free. But if you appreciate the work I'm doing, I would appreciate a paid subscription at $5 a month, $50 a year. You can also become a member on my locals, on my Patreon, on this YouTube channel, wherever you like. If you go to activelyunwoke.com/support, you will get all your options. You can make a one-time gift there. I am completely funded by you. So the amount of time that I get to spend doing stuff like this, teaching people, writing articles, doing podcasts, I like to keep all of my content for free on the internet so that I can teach as many people as possible, so I don't have a paywall. And the way I get around having a paywall is that you guys support the work I'm doing, and I'm really appreciative of it. And so if you want to become a paid member on my site or any of the other options, that will help keep my content free for all. So if you want to sign up, we do have a movie night coming tomorrow night. If you become a supporter on Locals, Patreon, Substack, or become a member on this here YouTube channel, you will be invited to join my supporter Discord. We are watching Warm Bodies tomorrow at 8 p.m. I normally don't stream on Sundays, and I'm not planning on streaming tomorrow right now because sometimes I need a break and I have other stuff in life to do. So if you want to come and join us for movie night tomorrow, though, I will be sending out the link sometime tomorrow afternoon. Get into the supporter Discord, get confirmed, get verified, all that stuff. Just tell us what platform you came from, and we will see you for the movie. And it is an awesome movie, guys. Please come and watch Warm Bodies with us. You're going to love it. Steven says, have a beer on me for Happy Hour Friday. Love your work. Thank you, Steven, and thank you for all your support lately. I see you posting here. I see you posting on Instagram. I really do appreciate it, my friend. Thank you so much. All right, guys, that's all I've got for right now. Mount the like button on the way out the door. Please subscribe to the channel if you have not already. I will be back streaming again on Monday at 5 p.m. Take care, have a great rest of your night, and we'll see you soon.